Out of all Japanese anime studios, one of them shall always have a special place in my heart, and that special one is Gainax, perhaps the most purebred studios of them all, whose works are known even by African meerkats, and they don't even have the internet down there. But although people always gush about Eve or Gurren Lagann, many of them seem to forget the people whose ideas gave birth to such wonderful products. And lo and behold, the directors of Gurren and my other favorite works created their own studio, and now they made Kiznaiver. Yep. Kiznaiver tells us a story about a schoolboy named Katsuhira Agata, an emotionless and at first spineless wimp who still lives only because of his childhood friend Chidori, who literally wants to dry hump him since the first episode. Then he meets the local Dr. Frankenstein, who forces him, Chidori, and a bunch of other colorful characters to participate in an experiment, and you see where I'm going with it, do you? Yeah, the series isn't the most original out there, as well as the characters. Thankfully, it can get a good story and show its characters in a unique and original way, right? Sorta. Giving the viewers an illusion of it is a more correct answer. A good illusion, yet it breaks the moment you simply stop and think about it for a moment. None of the big revelations ever influence neither characters' relationships or the viewer's understanding of their personalities. Even more, an observant viewer will guess what and why it will happen a few episodes before the show itself. The main shtick of the whole experiment, the creation of empathy between characters, though plays its part in the narrative, disappears as if it wasn't really there to begin with. Essentially, I can sum up my experience with the whole series in these words: predictable yet solid. The graphics are superb, as well as the music, from classic Japanese English in the opening to the funky electro in the character's theme, but considering the previous works of the studio and the people involved, it doesn't come out as something unusual and was to be expected, really. Kiznaiver is an anime created solely for the Western viewer. It has everything from which your average 20-30-year-old American weeaboo will ejaculate rainbows. Here's a bit of Evangelion, a bit of Gurren Lagann, a bit of Furikuri, a bit of Ergo Proxy, and the list goes on. And it's not a bad thing, I would say quite the opposite, yet in the end of the day, the viewer will be satisfied with what he saw, and in best case scenario after a week will forget what was this thing even about. And I don't view it as a sign of good anime that I can sincerely recommend to others. Kinda thinking about it, this anime and France's special services have a lot in common. There are things that were clearly made not for me, yet I'll try to adapt and use them every time. I don't understand why tablets are better than a simple button phone, yet I use them with different levels of success. I don't understand why people like Rasolnik, and I will murder every single bastard that eats it. And I also don't understand why people like the Trapped in Another World trope, yet I'll ramble and continue to watch it. In case you don't know, the Trapped in Another World trope is when a bunch of people go into a parallel world of your wildest imagination and using their unmatched skills in mechanical engineering, physics, chemistry, weapons, and any other shit granted to them by the furiously masturbating author, starts to make themselves the kings of it, ignoring the fact that your average earthling knows so much about the things he used that he might as well believe that they're created and powered by magic. My beef with this whole subgenre is that most of the time there's nothing in it but gushing on some idea, a time period, or just plain mindless trend copying. In Japan, this madness started after Sword Art Online bombed, and 1,000 other works tried to leech on its popularity in various levels of success. Well, what are you gonna do about it? Guess they like them MMOs. Yet I fail to see how any WoW player with at least a bit of dignity will watch this heresy and not kill himself or at the very least creators of this fuckery. And after hearing this, you'll probably think that I didn't like Grimgar. Yeah, but not because of that. I'll explain. Though Grimgar is your typical Trapped in Another World anime, it removes things that irritate me the most in this genre. The heroes are born from a tower with limited memory about themselves or where they came from. They remember their names, they remember their skills, and they know they're not local. Yet they don't remember anything about their previous world. They don't even know the meaning of many words they use, saying them more out of habit than necessity. And that's a good thing, removes the god syndrome these works typically fall into. Also, I should mention that bearing a few peculiarities with graphics, like some of the lines aren't animated, and intrusive music that isn't every fucking episode like they try to stick to the timeline, the anime style is decent enough. So what's the problem then? The problem is that authors didn't quite get the point of the whole genre. People like to see this shit, because they like to see how a simple doofus goes to another world and wrecks shit. Here, for almost 75% of the whole thing, they continue to act dumb. Cry and whine and bitch about everything, starting to actively act against their enemies only in the last few episodes. And I wouldn't mind that. Only these enemies aren't exactly start as an active threat to them either. Essentially, I can sum up the whole anime like this. A bunch of children with partial amnesia get transported fuck knows where, fuck knows why, and then some fuck literally tells them, "You're in the army now, bitches!" and sends them to kill goblins. Why goblins? Fuck if I know, but they must be killed. Seems that the local Middle-earth army just regularly summons all these poor fucks from other dimensions, brainwashes them, and then sends them to their death against an enemy whose only sin is that they dare to protect themselves against white menace. Which is a little hypocritical, don't you think? Anyways, if you like this trope, don't watch Grimgar, or you'll find nothing that you like here. But if you like to see how a bunch of school children would act in a hostile fantasy world, then this anime is for you. Oh, and about hypocrisy. This is Quiet from Metal Gear. This is Rogue Trainer from Grimgar. And this is Clementine. Yet most of you bitched only about the first one, even though it's the same anime as the rest. And if you don't believe that Metal Gear Solid is an anime, then you clearly haven't played the games, and I sincerely pity you. Making a good product is not an easy task. Besides the logical need of money, permissions, and the right people, your team must be talented, or at the very least understand that they do it if not for the art, then for profit. And the thing is, it is extremely easy to please a human. Your product doesn't have to be good, or even be of any quality for that. And since we live in a world where money and populism rule everything, it is not rare that some truly talented individuals die in shacks from cold, hunger, or some scary diseases, while people who make brown notes with menstrual blood get millions of dosh, and there's nothing you can do about it. Couldn't do it 1,000 years ago, and won't be able to do it 1,000 years after. Oh yes, the anime. Konosubarashi Sekai ni Sukufuku O, which I will further refer as Konosuba because with a name like that it won't be long till I start to criticize Indonesian politics, is another trapped in another world anime which tells a story about a Japanese schoolboy named Katsuba Sato that tried to save a girl from a truck, which in reality was a slow-moving tractor, then pissed himself and died. I am dead fucking serious. Then he goes to the spirit realm where the goddess who acts like a bitch annoys the hero so much that he decides to take her to a parallel world as a partner, a trophy, or a sex slave. It's not entirely explained from their interactions. During the show, they enter an adventurers guild, because of course they do, recruit a terrorist and a masochist to their crew, because of course they do, and start to do adventure stuff in which hijinks ensue, because of course they fucking do. And that's about it, really. What, you expect me to say something more? Well, okay. I was bored watching this. I actually fell asleep in the middle of the 5th episode, entirety of the 6th episode, and somewhere at the end of the 10th. I wasn't having fun with it, and during the entirety of the show, I couldn't but think that this anime and scary movie, as well as sequels and parodies, have a lot in common. Though they do not look alike stylistically, their humor is the same. Creation of stupid situations for purposes of directly parodying, and in case of Konosuba, making fun of all those tropes that made Sao so popular. The problem is that the anime was doomed to be successful from the very start, because all important female characters fall under stereotypes that make all those bunch of nunning imbeciles who have the indecency to call themselves anime fans go berserk, and especially Junibe or Chuni, or for those who aren't familiar with it, teenage hormonal tumult. Whether intentional or not, all three characters fall into this stereotype by design, speech, or both. Therefore, they are the perfect waifu material and an unlimited cash grab for the authors. Whatever I have to say about this thing, none will care. It doesn't matter that the graphics are too bright, the music is forgettable, the jokes fall flat and predictable, and every man who saw at least 10 anime titles saw every scene from this thing, even in fucking Western movies. And it doesn't matter that the script is what in Japan is considered to be essentially a fanfiction. It's the same song and dance as with The Twilight or The Hunger Games. The anime was successful, retards and school children are happy and asking for more, and they will get their fix whether someone likes it or not, and there's nothing you can do about it. As for myself, I'm not gonna cast my pearls before swine. Especially when they're glass pearls. Might hurt themselves, you know. Steampunk is a very peculiar genre, whose reasons to exist I've always questioned. For though its style and rules were written by fairly smart people and can be clearly seen in their works, nobody seems to know what to do with it. Even more, instead of somehow developing it further, most hacks either just blindly copy the old works or create new punk genres, ignoring the fact that there is almost no difference between clockpunk, steampunk, or electro aka Tesla punk, and all three of them can peacefully coexist within one work. The heart of the genre is not in what makes your automatons tick anyway, it's in retrofuturism, high-tech, low-life. By developing, I mean romanticizing the Victorian era as a whole. Although, of course, not all steampunk works are Victorian, many follow the spirit of the era, especially Victorian England, which always depressed me greatly. It is painfully easy to see that the author has no idea about what he's writing by simply reading that the work is placed in, let's say, USA 1839, while the description of their style and culture is the most British thing you have ever read. Of course, the fact that Great Britain and other countries of the 19th century had drastic differences in style and culture is ignored by everyone, even I realize that. Yet it always makes me sad, just like after watching this anime. Steam Boy is often described as an ode to steampunk, a perfect example of how it's done, and also it's made by the great Katsuhiro Otomo, the creator of Akira. Steam Boy tells a story about Steam family, namely James Roy, his father Edward, and grandfather Lloyd. All three of them, willingly or not, are after a device called Steam Sphere, a very steamy MacGuffin that can plunge the world into a second industrial revolution. And how do you think people use it? Right, creating weapons, because of course they do, why wouldn't they? If you place two humans in a closed space without anything, only two outcomes can happen. They either kill each other or have sex. But I digress. These three characters represent three stereotypical points of view on the same problem, while people around them have their own plans on the Steam sphere, and in the end all of this turns into a big skirmish between American and British forces in London. Our hero saves a girl as a result and turns into a hero with a jetpack. So what's the problem, you might ask? How do I explain it? Katsuhiro Otomo is the Japanese equivalent of James Francis Cameron. Both are known for their expensive works full of pathos, graphics and other crap. But the problem is that in retrospect, most of these works aren't that special or are actually the film industry's equivalent of fast food. Steam Boy is in many ways similar to Avatar. Both were the most expensive works of their time. Both were hyped by journalists and other humans. Both gained high-tier rewards, and both even have average games in their honor. And you know what? Mayhap when they were new they had their aesthetic value, or at the very least graphical. But in reality, under all that glamour lies a decently made average story at best and a graphomanic shit at worst. What is it is up to you to decide. I watched too many similar works in my day to forgive such things, for there is no sin graver in my book than a shoddily implemented idea. Although eating rasolnik is much worse. There are two things that Japanese like to do the most: be racist and butcher the endings of their products. All Japanese anime, films, and even their history can be summed up in those two sentences. And it's especially growling when the idea is interesting and the result is acceptable, but the ending is so shit that it ruins the whole experience. And since this season is almost over, I want to talk about one anime that I kinda skipped when it started, or it didn't even finish yet, fuck knows with all those leaks and piracy nonsense, yet have managed to capture my attention now. To my deepest regrets. And the name of this anime is Real Life, a sci-fi seinen drama from TMC Entertainment, aka creators of The Greyman, or for those old enough, the bastards that made a part of Chip and Dale's first season, as well as Sonic X, that awesome Jetix once upon a time. Not gonna lie, I expected a harem anime at first. Some 20-year-old guy gets transported into a school under the guise of a science experiment with one task: survive a year of punitive Japanese schooling system. Because it's fucking Japan, if the anime doesn't take place in a school, parallel world, or on top of a giant robot, that means that either someone was seriously underpaid or the author is a drug addict. All his bills, food, water and beer will be paid by the government via an organization that fights chronic teenage laziness. Well, okay, not the worst premise I saw. Then there's a bunch of characters of different shades of boring. An autistic schoolgirl, a schoolgirl with unwarranted self-importance issues, a schoolgirl that is clearly not a schoolgirl, a smart but virgin schoolboy, and a schoolboy who's actually not a schoolboy but a warden for our protagonist so he won't get any of the schoolgirls pregnant. You know, the usual. And you know what? I actually like the characters because at least I've started to care about them from the 5th episode, and that's already better than Game of Thrones, whose characters bore me 6 seasons in. The later the anime falls into your typical teenage crap with many cliches, there's your fireworks festivals and tests and club problems, etc. Never during my time watching I realized that I couldn't give a single toss about what happens, and that I could do something useful and not sit on the couch and watch lounging cartoons, in many ways because of how well written the main characters of this story. But as usual, the ending ruined everything, and those who watched it will mostly memorize it and only it. I won't spoil anything, but suddenly in the end, the series that was mostly drama out of the blue gives us plot twists that weren't mentioned anywhere before that and abruptly ends, leaving the viewer confused, and to be honest, slightly deceived. It's like in the end days of Second World War, Germany would suddenly publish photos of Emperor Hirohito in women underwear. I'm not even sure that I can recommend the anime, because the ending was so confusing that it's not entirely clear is this a school drama or a dystopia. Although, knowing Japanese, it's probably some kind of social experiment to create uber-Japanese, like Pokemon. What? I am held captive somewhere in Oceania and forced to watch some extruded garbage instead of doing something useful. If I'm in here for a long time, I demand to give me at least once in a while something from which I won't break my host arms. And that's why Warcraft, the movie! Warcraft. I remember this series. Back in 1994, I had the honor to play the first game, and I liked it. Though it's probably because I saw those new computers for the first time, showing me something like Custer's Revenge with Warcraft first graphics, and I would liked it as much. The second game was a substantial upgrade of the first, with better graphics, sound, models, and most importantly, plot. In our times, when all villains must be Nazis, bugs, or morally ambiguous, I really miss the orcs from second Warcraft. Clearly evil and dangerous, yet pragmatic and quite cunning enemies. The third game was a good game as well. The orcs weren't as villainous as in previous games. Their motivation was understandable. They had enough of repressions and decided to leave fucking Azeroth and create their own country. Arthas, Jaina, Uther, Sylvanas, they were all relatable and therefore easily found a place in hearts of many gamers. A shame that they haven't made Naga race playable and see combat more adequate, but no biggie. And then rolled the Warcraft game. I played it for like a week and happily forgot about this universe for a long time. And apparently that was a smart move. Considering how much they raped everything I liked about the universe, I clearly wasn't a target audience for them. so I had two options: bomb Blizzard's headquarters, or just stop giving even an ounce of fucks for them. And considering that they are still standing, you can probably guess what I chose. And now there's a Warcraft movie, about the first game if the advertising is to be believed. Now I must tell you whether the movie is shit or good. And I honestly can't decide. I realized from the start that this will not be the Warcraft I remember. All screenshots and teasers scream that this is not a Warcraft 1 movie or even Warcraft. It's WoW that tries to retell the story of the first game and not even from the source. Yet at the same time, I can't say that this was made shoddily like the rest of the game adaptations. It was clearly made by fans, even those parts of it that I personally didn't enjoy, like the existence of good orcs or the Dalaran flies, made me angry only after I watched it, which is already better than the new Ghostbusters. But the film had two big problems, at least in the theatrical release: the cuts and the fact that this is a World of Warcraft movie. It is painfully noticeable that the film was cut into bits in order to fit the format. That's why many scenes appear to be disconnected from each other and many characters are entirely pointless. And that's not saying that the final scene of fighting between Gul'dan and Durotan just looked silly and not at all epic. And WoW, well, this probably irritates only me, but still. If they had made the film stylistically more like the first game and not like the MMO, it would at least be memorable. People like the Lord of the Rings movie not only because it was epic and awesome, but also because it looked and felt different compared to other fantasy flicks of that time and Tolkien adaptations. Though this might sound outlandish to some of you, but not many people know who Tolkien was. Not many people know where Liberia or Bhutan is located. Peter Jackson made him more popular on the screen and fantasy genre looked profitable, at least for a little while. The Warcraft movie didn't do any of that. It's a good film to watch once, or 2-3 times in a director's cut. But ultimately, it is too trivial to be noticed by critics or masses, and too non-canon for hardcore fans to treat it seriously. Perhaps it is karma. Perhaps it was made like that deliberately. But nevertheless, remember this. Every fanbase of every project has a certain percentage of crazy people. This craziness can manifest differently. Some may cosplay a character that is clearly not his body type, gender, or even appearance, thus making a fool of themselves. Some will have a more strange relationship with characters, events, or even the universe of the project. Some might create their own story branches or fanfics of different levels of success. But to me, the scariest people in all fanbases are those who willingly associate themselves with villains. You know who I'm talking about.
Me and Darth Vader are so similar. When I grow up, I want to be just like Kaizen. Oh, Azula is so sexy. Pooh.
And the bad part of this is not that they want to be madmen, villains, or psychopaths. They're too cowardly or fat to follow their idols anyway. What I am more interested in is what kind of a shitty life do they live that they decided that this is the perfect role model for them. Still, what to do when all characters are assholes? Himoto Umaru-chan to me is a good example that people's quality of life had drastically worsened in the 21st century if this is considered to be a role model for someone. Why? Let's find out. This is a comedy about an everyday life of Umaru. Essentially a female Jesus incarnation, and the only thing she can't do is shit granulated kindness and cry rainbows. This is, however, her outdoor persona. The second she enters her house, she turns into your typical internet denizen, a hardcore nerd, and the biggest manipulative bitch in existence. In other words, she's a sociopath. And that's where the comedy part of this show usually happens. The other important characters are a workaholic brother who works in an office and essentially earns money only to pay bills, food, and any of his sister's whim, as well as 3 walking anime cliches that in context of the show are especially irritating. A clumsy schoolgirl, an autistic schoolgirl, and a chuny schoolgirl that intrusively competes with Umaru in literally everything. Essentially, the point is, they all want to be her friends, but can't because they can't socialize for shit. I hate every single character in this story. I hate Umaru because she's a manipulative bitch. I hate her brother because he's a spineless little bitch and obeys her sister's every whim. I hate the rest of the characters because they're bland and do not contribute anything of value. Like, seriously, those who watch the anime, can you remember the names of these characters, with the exception of the Chuny one, since shouting her name for any reason is literally a part of her character? And of course you can say that I overreact, or that's the point, you know, but that's the most irritating part for me. The characters do not change. And why would they? They're fine as it is. Here lies the biggest flaw of all this, at least from the story perspective. Bad people do not change, or at least get their motivations explained. Their arc remains as straight as this line, and about as interesting. And you know what's the most saddest part in all of this? I knew this was gonna get popular from the start. Art of marketing is the art of crowd control, and they ain't no fools in them studios. They know what people want, and they give it to them, thinking that even if the sales flop, it can turn cult classic and make them money in that way. All these macros, memes, and other crap with Umaru aren't appearing out of nowhere. They appear because people found a part of themselves in her, which honestly speaking makes me dread about the future of mankind. Though in the end of the day, who cares? Less work for me once I get out of here. Happy summer anime season ending, ladies and gents! Now it's time for me to incoherently ramble about something worthwhile and don't give a shit about the rest! Now, let's see our list. Well, there goes my optimism. Before I start, I should probably say that ReZero is actually a well-made anime. Not without its flaws, of course, but the good parts of it will certainly outweigh the bad ones, except one in particular, but that's for later. The animation quality is superb, 3D is used skillfully and doesn't give me eye cancer like certain someone, as well as the sound. Usually I rarely notice the soundtrack or original voice acting, since to me all these faggots sound the same, but this time, however, it would be unfair not to mention that both music and voices are actually quite well matched. And of course the characters and the story. You see, I am a simple creature. I can forgive the show or a movie many things as long as it manages to capture my attention by the 4th episode or the 14th minute. ReZero actually managed to have it on the 2nd one, and that's because I actually started to care about the characters. This, as well as their design, allowed me to even remember their names, which is quite a feat considering that I can retell you the looks of Aldebaran, but I can't for the life of me remember the name of Konosuba's protagonist. Now add some carefully placed, emotionally strong episodes, and you have a contender for the best anime 2016, at least in my opinion. Well, now about the bad stuff. Our main hero, Subaru Natsuki, is a stupid egotistical bastard, but his main difference from Konosuba's Oromaru protags is that he actually manages to hide it at first. Context. Subaru is your typical trapped in another world guy who's just randomly thrown into a fantasy world, Morrowind style, and do whatever. No super abilities, no stats, no money, no knowledge about their language or traditions. Well, okay, he has one ability, or else the anime would end on the 1st episode. But since it's effectively the main shtick of the series, I won't tell you what it is, only hint. It looks like what happens in video games when you press F9. The worst part of this is that while our hero shows himself like a wimp with a humongous ego from the start, he's not bad or stupid. He can think logically and actually learn from his mistakes, though not immediately, and although that ability of his is quite taxing on his mental health, he actually manages to grow a pair as the show progresses, only to lose them on the next episode. And this is the main drawback of the series as a whole. For every good or epic deed of our hero, we are forced to witness 4 or 5 times of pure idiocy from which I wanted to barf, especially when the hero knows what he's supposed to do. He only has to stop acting hysterical, calm down, and think about it for a moment. And after what happened in 13th episode, I just can't take this guy seriously, especially because everything that happens to him afterwards is his and entirely his fault. ReZero's world itself has a small number of problems as well, though it's mostly not because it's illogical, but rather because the show doesn't bother to explain the details, which can scare away the modern children who require everything to be simplified, yet will attract the lorehounds. And that's about it, really. Though I know I will regret saying it once it's actually aired, but I hope they will make a 2nd season of this, and I recommend everyone, even those who don't watch anime in general, to have a look at least 2 starting episodes of it. If you like those, you'll probably like the rest of it as well. Except the 13th episode. Oh yeah, and the real ending. In case you've been living on Venus Terminator for the last 20 plus years, Berserk is a manga about a dude named Guts, the closest Japanese had gotten to a Doom Marine in epicness and massive titanium balls. They're both pragmatic and sane, and first and foremost try to survive. Where other humans will hide, seek help from the gods, or just die, they will proudly stand against their lords and defeat enemies 10 times more powerful than themselves. And where a simple human shall waver, they will split the obstacle open with a giant sword and a murderous glee. And unlike many other anime and manga protagonists that literally shine with concentrated pathos, Guts became like that not because he's that awesome, but because life played a very cruel joke on him. Stories about such characters sooner or later are studied in schools, and for a reason. This is how you do dark fantasy right, and modern authors in this genre will agree with me on this one. And now, after God knows how many years, the long-awaited 2nd season appears, because everybody knows if an anime studio decided to make a continuation of a 20-year-old anime, then that means that someone has some serious debts to settle. Yep, there's a new Berserk, which was wanted by, clearly not me, and was made by people with not only some truly mad animating skills, but also some hellish mix of 3D straight out of 2002, with occasional cases of drawing, digital drawing if to be precise, and still shots literally ripped off a manga. And that wouldn't be that bad if they hadn't also taken a transitional arc after which fucking Dungeons and Dragons and naked little girls' buttocks stars, and considering how they made nudity here, I'm afraid they'll fuck even this up. The only thing worthwhile in this steaming pile of excrement is the music, and I'm not only talking about everyone's favorite someone shoved a cactus up a Japanese opera singer's bum, but the rest as well, except the opening, because it's fucking Berserk. You don't go, you go, and also the opening itself was painfully generic, I think is the term. ReZero made his openings and endings way better. So without beating around the bush too much, I'll repeat myself and will be straightforward. For any self-respecting Berserk fan, this is blasphemy. If this is the kind of anime continuation for Berserk we have to suffer, then I would prefer that Kentaro Miura would do like Gogol and just burn his creation so we won't suffer. And believe me, the further it goes, the worse it will get, because after this arc, we will start getting full-fledged D&D with level ups, teammates, demons fighting, fighting other demons, etc. With every new arc, Berserker guts are turning into an average seinen. It was to be expected, really, but still. Don't watch this. Though if you're watching this episode, you've probably already finished it, and if so, my condolence to you. Whatever from this list you damaged, you won't be able to repair it. The ability to write is like the ability to cook. It appears to be useful, fun, and famous people who make money on this earn at worst a few thousand in local currency. But the problem is that you can't just simply throw 2 eggs on a skillet and expect it to be paid. Any idiot can do that. Therefore, any starting cook will sooner or later have to learn the high arts of cooking, like chemical cooking, ingredients dosage, the ability to judge them by their age, understanding what is a fat bag and where do you show it, etc. Following this allegory, just like there are difficult cooking recipes like consommé, so does literature has its genres, which I consider hard to master, even if they don't exactly look that difficult. Comedy is one of them. It is actually pretty hard to make a normal human being feel anything, that's just how they work. This is why making him laugh is especially hard. The most basic technique for that is violence. Animation is especially good for that sort of thing, cause real violence rarely is funny unless you're fucked in the head or like me. The second most basic technique is lampoon, and its more lighter form parody. And today I'll talk about that. One Punch Man is a direct parody of superhero manga and comic books. Our main hero Saitama is essentially the strongest human in the universe that kills anything by the aforementioned one punch. As a result, he starts to suffer from an existential crisis and depression since he can't find any enemies worthy of a real fight. During the whole anime, he starts to actually rank up, finds and befriends a few local superheroes, enters in something like a superhero union, and essentially is living the life. A shame that most of these superheroes are retarded, overly epic, or have egos the size of a solar system, thus making Saitama look like the only sane human in a madhouse. And that's about it, really. Simple, straightforward, and stylish. This should suffice for a 4-5 series anime, and well, of course it fucking is. This is why I don't like the modern world. In my times, people knew when to stop, if not willingly, then due to physical and technical limitations. With the rise of the internet and consumerism, both people and authors don't know when to stop. Spoilers, by the way. But essentially, the further the anime and manga goes, the further we are moving away from Saitama to also interesting bios and stories of the rest of the cast that no one gives a damn about, only to show how awesome Saitama is compared to these losers. And it's not like they made it like that deliberately. By design, Saitama is a boring character, and watching him just punch his enemies to death every episode would bore the audience pretty quickly. The audience themselves don't make the fucking situation any better. After I was briefly introduced to various fan art and discussion forums, I can conclude that people at best didn't understand the point of the character, and that is not mentioning that all these dick measuring contests simply show the intellectual level of anime fans, confirming the unpleasant stereotypes about them. But as I was saying, it is a good light-hearted anime, perfect for relaxing, and I recommend you to have a look at it at least once. I also sincerely hope that there will be no second season for it because it was made the right way, and most importantly, ended with a bang. Unlike this episode that ends about... Now, do you like films with Jackie Chan? I like films with Jackie Chan. In contrast to Bruce Lee films, they're more fun. Bruce Lee always has the same angry, serious face, while Jackie heroes are for the most part simple, lazy, and fight only when cornered. Or beat women, but that's trivia. And what's most important, unlike Bruce Lee, Jackie actually managed to find himself in something other than cinematography. As a singer, as a martial arts director, and even as a voice for Master Monkey in Kung Fu Panda. This is essentially what I feel towards Mob 100. While One Punch Man is a Bruce Lee film, Mob is a Jackie Chan film. The work of the same one, Mob is, at least from my point of view, his more serious work. While One Punch Man is a comedy that revolves around one joke, Mob has not only a funny protagonist, but also secondary characters that aren't pointless or hyperbolic, quite the opposite in fact, they go equal or even surpass the main hero. None of the characters are useless or without a purpose in the story, and what's most important, unlike Saitama, they don't orbit around Mob, it is Mob who orbits around them. Shit, forgot to tell you about the plot. Oh well, Mob Psycho 100 is a story about an 8th grader named Shigeo Kageyama, or Mob, who's the strongest esper in the world, and while in the anime itself it's not that scary, in the manga he can be downright terrifying, rightfully earning its horror comedy genre. Realizing that he can easily destroy anything he touches, Shigeo starts to hide his powers, suppressing his emotions and learning from Arataki Reagan, a real esper, i.e. a charlatan that earns his bread by fooling various idiots about spirits and curses, though whether or not Mob understands that is not entirely clear. Besides him, there are 2 characters with more or less important roles, but if you want to know more about them, go watch the show or read the manga, I'm not a fucking compendium. One's comedy is a comedy of absurd, subversion, and main hero's existential crisis, and Mob is not an exception. Shigeo is a wimp, a coward, for the most part doesn't know what he wants, and is constantly surrounded by people who actively use him for their own means. And in the end, the culmination is not what it was expected, or sometimes downright stated, with the exception of moments when Mob is actually serious. Then you can say he gives everyone near him wings. What else should I say? Oh yeah, the graphics. They are stylized like something, perhaps one's art style, and for various mentally challenged that have gotten used to polished mugs of various kanekis and other boring tablet drawings, it will look atrocious, but honestly speaking, it never bothered me, though the reason for this is probably that I watch animation for a few decades now and saw both worse and something similar. So what is better from my perspective? I would say that it depends on what you want to see. Both One Punch Man and Mob are comedies designed for a relaxed view, but their main difference are graphical and in the story. I know it sounds predictable, but still. If you want to see an adventure drama with tons of badass action and fights, go and watch One Punch Man. If you want to see something more melancholic yet still entertaining, watch Mob. Personally, I like both of them, though it's not saying much. Charles XII also liked various stuff, and it didn't end well for him. Human consciousness is a strange thing, eh? There is so much stuff we can forgive to a man, and so many situations when even the most calm and humble of us will grab a knife. And also, what I always liked in our psychology is our tendency to romanticize bad people. Like, for example, Robin Hood. A bandit and a robber depriving income of people that haven't exactly done anything wrong according to their societal norms. But he is considered to be a romantic hero. Hitler, Ian Smith, David Jefferson, Stalin and the rest. Villains, murderers, racists, yes. But what's the most amusing thing for me, and what's purely coincidentally unites them all, is that today there are people that have a sincere nostalgia for them, their countries and ideas. And it's not that I don't understand why. It's very easy to follow people who sincerely believe in what they're doing, for good or bad. What's with all this philosophical bullshit, you ask? People like and desire to flock around those people or groups that are surrounded with charisma or charm, even if basic logic tells you to run away from these bastards as far as humanly possible. Bandits are one of such groups. It doesn't matter how you call them, mafia, triads, yakuza, one of those funky-colored gangs from the slums, it's all the same shit. They all share a special status in literature, stories, films, and games. And although I understand why, I will never get tired of being surprised. 700 years have passed, and our psychology is the same as always. Funny that. Well, okay, I wasted everyone's time long enough. It's about time I tell you about this anime. 91 Days is an anime about an Italian mafia from the 13 colonies during the Prohibition, made not like your average anime, more like similar movies. These kinds of animes, the reason why I believe that animation is better than cinematography and theater. And those you're limited by real-world laws, while animation isn't. Any action is possible if the artist wishes it. This is the reason why I think that if Japanese weren't racist and at least once in a while pulled their heads out of their asses, the entertainment industry of the 21st century wouldn't be this fucking boring. The problem is that the positives of this anime are at the same time its negatives, namely its genre and theme. Unlike Re:Zero, Berserk, Mob 100 and other mahou shoujos, 91 Days from the start was a niche product for a very small number of people, the same way as Godfather, Scarface, or The Sopranos. Yeah, many people will like it, even those who don't usually watch this sort of thing. It'll possibly get a few awards, and will be frequently remembered, but that's all smoke and mirrors. This anime will never get the recognition and love it deserves, which kinda saddens me, but at the same time it was kinda natural. The reason why I don't describe the story, graphics, or music like I always do, and don't even tell you whether I liked it or not, is again, the theme and the genre. The plot? A crime drama. Go read the plot synopsis for aforementioned Scarface or Ghost Dog: The Way of the Samurai, and you'll have the basic idea about not only the plot, but also about the fate of our heroes. Graphics and music? If you want to be treated seriously in this sort of genre, you kinda don't have much options in drawing styles or music variation. Did I like it? Hard to say. Let's phrase it like that. I can without a doubt recommend it, but I can't say that I liked it because it's a crime drama. Unlike, let's say, fantasy, this genre is from the start bound by very strict rules, deviating from which never ends well for its authors in a financial sense. And I don't know about you, but when you read the same story for 190 years, it gets boring after a while. Human consciousness is a strange thing, eh? So the new stuff is finally dealt with, and that means it's time to relax a bit from all of this nonsense, but what will I talk about today? What? Oh, a video game? Why not? It's not like I have any better things to talk about. So during these last 2 years, I watched one of my colleagues play a game called Spiral Knights. Spiral Knights is a graphical multiplayer network game. I'm saying this because the last multiplayer game I played was some mud about Bulgarian independence war on a very old internet that cost a lot and quite often. After that, me and my previous master tried to play some graphical MMOs, and I wasn't impressed, mostly because they looked like Muslim hell, and secondly because they were all painfully generic and samey. Until 2002, I could name you only 4 graphical multiplayer games that I could watch and don't have a stroke. But after that I died and kinda never had the opportunity to see the others, sorry about that. Oh yeah, Knights. The game tells us a wonderful story about some creatures, might be humans, that crash landed on some planet and do what any reasonable human would do: create a colony, murder any opposition, and start to actively interfere in local politics, giving little shit about anything or anyone, only to dig to the center of the planet, for some reason. As far as I understood, they want to drain all energy out of it and return to their historical homeland because, again, fuck the locals. Definitely humans. The gameplay... I liked it. It's something that I always sought in these graphical MMOs but could never find. Real-time, more or less battles. Most of these games even now are more turn-based than real-time, and often enough your equipment and game level has more value than your actual skill in controlling your character. I never felt like that in Spiral Knights. With my instructions, my colleague managed to solo missions that were considered to be impossible for one player, and in some cases he wasn't even hurt or anything, while his equipment was essentially first level. Combine that with amusing lore, cute graphics, and not so annoying sound, and yeah, I was having fun. For the first 2 months. The moment the game's novelty value drops is when you see that the game is painfully underdeveloped and literally is on the verge. Arcade, the local equivalent of an open world, is essentially useless because the reward for it is significantly less than that of a mission with much more work. PvP exists, but I thought it's pointless, besides there are only 2 modes for it. The missions themselves are not only few in number, but to progress into other ranks, and subsequently missions, you'll have to upgrade your equipment with, guess what? Right! Money or months of replaying the same missions, usually the boss one cause the reward is better. Although in game's defense, it does have a lot of equipment, even though it's not that creative. Besides this, there is nothing else to do in the game. Maybe the game has some sort of special events or something. Yeah, but most of them usually have a time limit after which you can go and eat dick. But to compensate that, you can buy costumes! Lots and lots of costumes that make your character look like he ran away from a Mardi Gras, but what's the point of them I never understood. He can be as fancy as you want, but it's not gonna change anything, and I'm not talking about efficiency, I'm talking about gameplay as a whole. What is the point in buying costumes if your character would act and react the same way in any of them? Why does my character, dressed as a local Satanist, doesn't praise Henry VIII or something? And in the end, with the exception of missions, there is nothing interesting or of value in the game, and the moment you finish them all, you can just delete the game entirely, and considering that it is also free, there is a high chance that the creators will have jack from it, and rightfully so. If you enter the game now, you'll see an empty server with a few people here and there. I heard that the game changed its owner, but these problems were there even when my colleagues started playing, so why should I care? And the saddest part of all this is that this problem is not new to me, and is prevalent in real-time strategies that I actually play when I'm allowed to use those flexible plastic hands. I'm certain that this problem has a name, but I personally call it the rush. Here's how it works. You make a game, dump it into the market, and forget about its existence, thinking that players, fans, will create new content by themselves. There are 2 problems with this. 1, the industry doesn't work like that, even in case of exceptions from the rules. 2, unlike strategies, these multiplayer games never allowed the players to make their own content, and never will. Here's my advice to any person who wants to make a game of any continuous genre. Constantly update your game. Throw new weapons and maps, fix the old ones, fix the balance, create new factions, etc. People aren't gonna do your work for you if you clearly show them that in best case you're not interested, and worst, you're interested in something else. Using Spiral Knights as an example, instead of creating useless costumes, the devs could spend the same time on creating new missions, or at least making some unique items or recipes that could only be found in the arcade. That would make ventures into that boring place at least somewhat useful. Instead of creating pets, essentially skills, and abandoning the idea, you could evolve it. More pets, more skills, more everything. Blizzard Entertainment mastered this approach even before they made millions of dollars. Warcraft 1 and 2 are not only supported to this very day, but also the last patch for the second game was published in 2008, I think. But enough of me whining. The moral of this is simple. To create a good game, especially multiplayer one, you must first and foremost always support it, both morally and physically, with not only add-ons, but also smaller updates, and secondly, never try to chew more than you can swallow. A game that once a week makes something new with 1,000 loyal fans that slowly trickle profit is much better than a game that was just dumped into the market and closed after a month because people got bored of it. Oh yeah, my owners told me that the previous episode didn't have enough jokes, so please listen to this symphony. Isn't that funny that modern people always want to subconsciously kill themselves? Well, okay, maybe it's not that dramatic, but you have to agree with me that my reasoning for this is quite obvious. First, there was a torrent of different horror films where an evil and unstoppable maniac kills everything he sees. Then there was a torrent of undead that killed everything they see. Then there was a torrent of people that that killed everything they see, you see this in a retrospect and kinda having a laugh. Japanese both know and don't know this trend. Although apocalyptic anime ain't new, they were always more Eastern in style, less epic, more esoteric. But after the title you read in the name of this video, it kinda exploded and quickly stopped. In my head, Attack on Titans for some reason always associates with Power Rangers. You sit there and watch it, kinda starting to understand the characters and root for them, and as soon as you finish it, you yell, "Oh dear lord, what in the name of Holy Presbyterian fuck did I just watch and why am I not regretting it?" Both of these works have something simple and stupid that still manages to touch our basic human instincts. That's why even the fans will agree with me that these shows are stupid. But at the same time, they're quite happy with its stupidity. Even the plot by itself is stupid and painfully predictable. The world is essentially dead, surviving humanity lives in a state of mild non-caring behind a wall, and a boy named Aaron Yeager, a girl named Mikasa Ackerman, and some faggot lived a happy average life until a giant human anatomy model broke said wall and Titans ate Aaron's mother. Following the Japanese plot cliché number 3674, Aaron vows to genocide every Titan in the world, and that's all you need to know about the plot. This is essentially an undead film, it's just that undead here are killed in the most impractical way possible that in real life would be replaced with something simpler like 100 years ago. I immediately dismissed every single character with the exception of those three as cannon fodder or traitors, cause that's just how these films work. The problem is, however, that this is not a Hollywood movie, this is a Japanese anime. So we also add obvious level ups, a dark, epic and awesome alpha male who will make every girl, man and pet panties moist, and of course my favorite cliché, yelling in the camera some shit like, "It's impossible but he made it!" But still, why exactly did I like it? Possibly for the same reason why people love Death Note. I won't be the first saying it, but first and the most important reason for this will be Thanos! Just look at these soldiers, how they fly in the air and being violently murdered by Titans! Look how graceful this all is! Listen how a fucking orchestra accompanies everything they do on the battlefield! Gaze how they slice them Titans good and meaty! But pathos is only one of the reasons. The second big reason is the violence. This is of course not the first gory anime, but still, before this one they kinda stopped making them like they used to. And if anything, people like to watch some poor bastard get killed as violently as possible. Well, and the last but not the least important thing here, the design. In case you haven't noticed, the world of Attack on Titan is quite well made and not as illogical as it appears to be at first glance. Every episode has a small lore bit that explains how it all works. The blades, the gas tanks, that maneuvering system, etc. The Titans themselves are pretty awesome as well. Even if technically they aren't a threat by themselves, their appearance, behavior and what they want are bound to terrify some weak-willed people. But the most important question is, should there be a new season for this, and do I recommend watching it? No and yes. Yes, because it's a dumb action flick, perfect to see once and forget about it. No, because everything good in the series was already animated. Kinda spoilers, but the next season will be a full fucking Titan punk, where everything is a Titan. The kings are Titans, the walls are Titans, even Allah is actually a Titan. Oh, and there are also lesbians there. Perhaps they're also Titans. What do I consider to be an Attack on Titan clone? It's simple, really, because they usually follow similar clichés. Of course, Titans were not the first one to use them, but since nothing more notable came during the last 4 or 5 years, I will use it as an example. So, you can easily write off an anime as an Attack on Titan clone if the plot has the following things in it. Everyone in the world is dead thanks to some big monsters. The surviving humanity is forced to live in walled-off cities that occasionally are attacked by said monsters. But these aren't your regular monsters, protected by wild magics they are, so they have to be killed in a particularly stupid way, usually with the help of a special metal called bullshitium that for some reason can only be mined in or somewhere near said city, in the entire fucking world. And since bullshitium is a ridiculously expansive, fancy and pretty metal, you can't just let some random hoo-has use it, no. Only local military or militia are allowed. And coincidentally, they're also our main heroes. Oh yeah, and they die. A lot and very violently. So you guessed it correctly. Today, Black Bullet is on the chopping block. Black Bullet almost fully goes through our checklist with its own things here and there. For example, besides bullshitium, little girls that are half monsters are also considered to be a weapon. Well, okay, not entirely new, but at least they retold it differently. Oh, and in case you still haven't realized, be prepared to see how said little girls are tortured and killed in the most violent ways possible, not only from local gastritis, but also by humans, because racism and also that typical Japanese mentality in anime. You because you don't diphtheria, I'll cut you! Things are so bad that in one episode an entire school of said children is blown up thanks to some terrorists. Just as a note to any writer or game designer listening, killing children and animals is, while effective, no arguing about that, a very cheap way to make a human care, and besides, a very unreliable one. Of course, the majority will cry in righteous anger, yelling that racism is the source of all evil, but for critics this will be seen as hackneyed at best, and a sign of bad taste and graphomania at worst. In my case, I wasn't impressed, because when I was in Congo I had the honor to command a few Kadongo squads. I am not going to be impressed or be overly emotional over a child dying, and I'm talking about this because this is kind of the main thing of this anime. Our main hero, pedophile, loves and respects every little girl out there because he's the main hero, of course he will. And while there's a war against gastritis, anime almost constantly reminds us about a subplot involving rights of these girls and all that nonsense. But still, you can't just shit all over an anime, you gotta praise it for something. Well, I liked the local army idea and the main human villain. Our protagonist is essentially a mix between a militia member and a spec ops whose main task is to destroy gastritis in pair with a discriminated child. Every child has a specific type that determines their abilities and usefulness. And you know what? This could make a fine game or a game class, don't you think? And the main villain, he's... well, just look at him. He has a jacket, he has a hat and a mask, and he likes to kill people. For some reason, I sense a kindred soul in him. Don't know why, though. But unfortunately, even with him, I clearly understand why this anime failed. There is nothing interesting or memorable in it. Such stories were everywhere after Attack on Titan and Shinsekai Yori, and in general, the anime is pretty... disposable. But still, I think it's worth seeing it once, at least to steal some ideas from it. Oh yeah, I nearly forgot. The villain has two guns with names that probably aren't translated this way, but who cares? Spanking Sodomy and Psychedelic Gospel. Why did I told you that? And why the hell not? Now where? So we finally came to the king of Attack on Titan clones. A big project from the same studio that created the thing, the project that outright annihilated the rest of the clones. Italians on an armored train, or as how boring people call it, Cabaneri of the Iron Fortress. I am angry just saying this name. So the essentials are, you guessed it, the same, it's just that instead of big stupid giants or mutated whatever, the world is dead due to video game zombies. I'm serious, they're great, they definitely bite people, and to kill them you have to shoot or aim at the big glowing piece of shit in their torso, or as I like to call it, every single gamer is mentally deficient, so we have to highlight the weak spots or they might hurt themselves. Our setting is something of a classical shogunate, but with steampunk aesthetic. The cities are surrounded by walls, guarded by steam samurai with some kind of air carbines. A weapon that I honestly never expected to see as a battle weapon, mostly because people don't know that back in the day air rifles could kill. And special trains circulate between said cities, delivering resources and other important stuff. How did they manage to build so many roads during a zombie apocalypse? Don't ask stupid questions. Our main hero is a local genius with a stupid name. Seriously, it's like a man with hiccups tries to say the word coma. Hickama! Hickama! Of course, his entire family gets murdered, hence why he's always pissed and masochistic, but he's not a samurai, he's a steam engineer, local handyman. But since he can't just live in peace, his city is captured by zombies that can operate trains, he himself gets bitten, after which he happily uses his autoerotic asphyxiation device and stops the virus spread before he transforms into a zombie. Don't ask stupid questions! And now he's Cabaneri. Not a man, not a zombie, and everybody hates him but loves him afterward. But he's not the only Cabaneri. There are also a bunch of women Cabaneri because apparently female bodies are used to transport various shit while males are too stupid for that. And now he, an obligatory waifu for anyone who liked this piece of shit and some random basic bitches, must go to... who cares? The local villain's gonna intercept them anyway. An exiled son of the Emperor and the leader of the most effective zombie-killing unit in the whole country. And what's his dastardly plan, you might ask? He wants to kill his father, become an emperor, and destroy his own country with zombies in the biggest child fit you could ever imagine. Why so? Why couldn't he do it more discreet? What the fuck does this have to do with our main hero? Do not ask stupid questions! Is that so hard to understand? So as you've probably already guessed, the plot is complete and incomprehensible gibberish whose holes are bigger than a country's budget in Europe, and that becomes completely pointless in the last episodes. The characters themselves are bland and forgettable and, like the plot, do not contribute anything of value. It might as well be a retelling of Cipollino's story, nothing would change. And you know what's the saddest part in all of this? I really wanted this anime to be good. The first 2 episodes were genuinely good and got me hooked in the world and its inhabitants, and that's not saying that this is what I always wanted from steampunk. Authenticity. It looks pretty, it sounds pretty, but god damn it, it's so stupid and pointless! The main hero is a fucking Gary Stew that makes shit by himself that people apparently never thought about for like hundreds of years. The main villain is a joke, and all those hints that he's like our main hero immediately fly in the window the moment you logically analyze his actions. And Yamume is created only to force in a sad samurai story of sacrifice in the name of her master, And even with that, the only reason to root for her, she has a vagina and is very sad. Okay, that's it. Time to take a vacation from all this shit and change the scenery. Those fuckers torrented the last popular Western cartoons. Let's see how much they changed from the 90s. You know, I never liked Western entertainment industry. When I first saw the moving pictures on a big screen, I was very impressed by that, and I think that in the West, people stopped making good films somewhere after World War II. Films stopped being interesting and became a banal chewing gum, possibly because they were made faster. Animation in the civilized part of the world was better in many ways because back then people who done it actually gave a shit about what they're doing. I know it's a very weak criticism, but still, this is the big difference and virtue of animation to me. It doesn't take a lot of effort to make a good movie. To make a good animation, you have to actually try. But like everything in this world, the older you get, the more your view on things gets corrupted. Oliver and Elias, the old entrepreneurs, became multimedia giants and ossified. The golden age of comics was replaced by Comic-Con and censorship, and William Joseph and Quimby died. Hanna-Barbera was devoured, and with them the MGM animation studio was killed. This all has a logical economic explanation, but I prefer to name things in the simpler terms. Bastards. Every single one of them. And that's why I skipped most of the popular 90s Cartoon Network, Jetix and other cartoons, cause one, my anger was that strong, and second, I was busy shooting black communists and Albanians, there was no time for cartoons. So when they showed me the Avatar, I wasn't expecting anything good out of it. And was pleasantly surprised. Avatar: The Legend of Aang is a pretty good show with an interesting world and well-written characters that don't make you want to gut someone, and perhaps the main plus of the show, it treated itself seriously and from the start gave the characters missions that as a result changed them or their personalities. Aang, Katara, Sokka, Zuko, Toph, Azula and the rest, they weren't stationary, they were changing every season, were better or worse, and that's not a thing every anime can do. Of course, the show has its weak spots. For example, for a so-called pacifist, Aang clearly killed not one person with its airbending, while our main villain Ozai is much more boring compared to how he was portrayed previously, and as a whole his plan was too predictable and idealistic. Are people really that stupid to not realize that the giant flaming thing in the sky covering the sun can boost firebenders? Why does Ozai think that he can in best one and worst few days annihilate an entire continent of people that can bunker underground? Our nomads were destroyed because they lived on small islands in isolated temples. It's not that hard. If there is something I can criticize, it's the music of the show, and not in the sense that it's bad, but in the sense that it's pretty forgettable. I've watched the last episode like half an hour ago, and I don't remember if there was any music at all except for the opening sequence. And also what wasn't explained is, who was that mind-blowing Iron Man? Seriously, who the fuck is he? And that's about it. To tell you more about this show would be me retelling every episode of it, and even with that, it wouldn't do much. The plot is generally shown in the first episode, or in the description of wherever you're watching it, and it doesn't deviate from that the entirety of 3-4 books. If for some reason you still haven't watched it, then I recommend you doing so. Oh, and yeah, do I think that giant turtles that can bend energy is a lazy move from the writers? Yeah, but you have to agree with me that it looked pretty. I know that the authors made a continuation of the Avatar not so long ago with new Master of the Elements, and this time I'll make an exception and watch it. Let's hope it doesn't disappoint me. Disappointed! Very disappointed! Quite disappointed! But let's not go ahead of ourselves, shall we? Let's start with the things I actually liked. Believe me, that's gonna be a short list. First, the United Republic as an idea. Though they shat on it in every way possible, I thought it was quite a neat idea, logical in its context. I even liked the style of it, even though I strongly disagree with such big technological advancement. Aang's death was essentially one generation ago. Where the fuck did they get cars? Where did the radio came from? Why are there fucking mechas? Why don't they have guns then? Gunpowder is known in the Avatar world, and before you start objecting, I am not against dirigibles. I am not against tanks, submarines, or other mechanisms. They work on magic. Hell, I am not even against the metal police dudes. However, technology doesn't work that way. Republican City should be somewhere 17th, 18th century technologically, not the fucking roaring 20s. Second, Tenzin, a real man and hero of this show. Aang's son and the new airbending master. Tenzin's balls are humongous and made of bronze. I'm kinda surprised why women don't get pregnant just by being near him. He and his family essentially deals with every problem by themselves. Terrorists from the first book, this bold bastard killed them with his ass. Those big and scary Red Lotus members that made Korra piss ectoplasm the entire book. Tenzin wiped the floor with their leader and they had to gang up on him to properly subdue him. To put it shortly, this is a real protagonist. And now to the bad stuff. Told you it's gonna be a short list. First, the entire lore of the Avatar was just unceremoniously retconned. Turtles gave Aang the ability to bend energy. Pfft, screw that! Bloodbending worked only in full moon. Fuck that! The ability to conjure lightning could only be done by the most experienced firebenders, which were like 4 or 5 people in the entirety of the show. No one cares! Second, the plot. Let me retell it shortly. So we start with Cora going to this Republic City and killing a local terrorist cell. Then Cora kills Satan. Then Cora kills terrorists. Then Cora kills Hitler. You see the problem now? This is the basic mistake of an ignoramus. How could you so foolishly made it? After Cora killed Satan, the source of all evil in the world, do you really think that Hitler and a bunch of anime villains can make people care about Cora's fate? Ah, yeah, of course, she's a woman, so innocent and brittle. And of course, Cora. Cora is a terrible human being. There is nothing good in this character except her body. And even for that, you have to thank anime. Without it, she would probably look like some woodland monstrosity. Cora is the most banal and obvious Mary Sue I have witnessed for the last few months. You know, in anime there are a few similar characters, but even Umara and however the fuck that piece of shit from Cabaneri was named, bleak in comparison with this stupid cunt. From the first episode, the authors tell us that she is essentially a god. She can do everything, beat everyone, and is the best of the best. She is so special that after killing Satan, the entire Avatar line just ends, making her the first Avatar ever, bitches! And what's the most fucking offensive in this is that she never actually shows this superiority. Throughout the entirety of the show, enemies kick Cora like a blind kitten, even though with her powers, all of that should have ended kinda like this. All those tears, amnesias, and other dribble only annoyed me because the authors realized that what they're doing is bullshit, yet they either were paid well, or they just didn't care. And about that last minute when it was kinda confirmed that Cora was a lesbian. You know, I never actually cared much about that. Even more, I don't think that means anything at all. In case you forgot the fucking show, Cora dated with everyone in her team. Asami was essentially the last on the list. Should the show continued, I wouldn't be surprised if in a few episodes Cora would take Tenzin away from his wife or seduced one of his children. Cause you know what they sing in Rigoletto. Woman is notable for wayward notions, ply and emotions, playful caprices, quite unreliable, yet so beguiling, pouting or smiling, she always teases. Woman is noted for wayward notions, ply and emotions. Playful caprice. A grabber warrior mask. Could be worse, but what I don't like in West Africa's masks is that most of these that go for sale have mouth. Hard to show any emotions where your mouth can only go up and down, see? Oh well, we'll have to adapt. So since we have like a few weeks till the end of the season and I have to talk about something, we'll start siphoning through the suggestions. One of my first comments was a request to review a harem anime from... I forgot who, sorry about that. Well, here's a harem for ya, Mangaka and his S&M squad. An adaptation of an apparently popular young coma, the anime tells us a story about... mangaka named Yuki Aito, his assistant Sakoto Ashisu, and other women helping him in his hard work. And since being a mangaka ain't easy, his work touches a difficult aspect of human relationships and is a quite knowledgeable commentary about human psyche and about the inherent damage of political propaganda on young minds. Yes, he works on a pantsu manga. And that's essentially all you need to know about the plot. You know, at first I never really understood why my bosses thought that this is a harem anime and not slice of life, but that's probably because I grew up on entirely different harems. And I must admit that this is an example of a quality harem, at least from my point of view. I never understood the hate that most anime fans have for the harem cliché, in many ways because most of the so-called criticism can easily be used to not only a lot of other anime, but also to books and films. At the same time, I understand why people don't like harems, but I think that the main reason for that is that most anime fans can't see themselves as the main hero. Entertainment piece lives or dies depending on consumer's ability to place himself as the protagonist or whatever qualifies as such. Harems in Japan are popular because this is the dream of any antisocial teenager, suddenly to become wanted by attractive females. And the same goes for other types of harems, something that in the rest of the world is less prevalent, but can be seen. And often when people talk about harem anime, they only talk about the bad ones, because you can talk about bad ones. But what bad can you say about the good? The Comic Artist and His Assistants is a good anime. It's made in a format that's easy to watch with characters that are hard to hate. Yuki Aito is an eccentric, perverted masochist that has a habit to behave inappropriately in public. But he's not a bad guy. He's kind, tender, and what's most important, truly loves his co-workers and wishes them only the best, even if that means sacrificing his own well-being. Is it any wonder that a large large part of female characters in the show either love him or show at least some level of affection. And said female characters, though made in standard Japanese cliches, are not at all bad, and considering the format, quite well written. Also, their voices are fitting, and I even managed to recognize one, which is already impressive. It's just a good anime that I recommend you to watch. I of course could sit here for hours and tear this anime apart, saying that the animation quality is mediocre, music is lacking, and that most of the humor revolves around assistant's sadistic tendencies towards Yuki. Yet that's all just banal nitpicking. But here lies the most paradoxical flaw of the anime. It's good, and therefore it's unremarkable. You'll watch it, have a dose of positive emotions, and will forget that this anime ever existed in like 2 days. But that's just consumer psychology. Ain't nothing you can do about that. Oh wow, we have a rare guest today. It's not often Japanese make a World War II anime that doesn't also make people depressed. And that's not saying about this specific aesthetic. You know what I'm talking about, when everything is so historical-like, except our main hero that is suddenly a mage. I'm sure that this subgenre has a name, but since I don't know it, we'll call it Historical Highlander. Izetta the Lost Lesbian is an anime about non-Germans fighting non-Poland in, not World War II with interwar technology? Doesn't matter. We have 3 main heroes. Izetta, slightly dumb witch that can blow up buildings, Finne, ruler of Scotland and the most perfect overlord ever existed, and Izetta's boobs that take like 50% of screen time. Well, those are some fine boobs, can't argue with that. And since we are in not World War II, the plot, I think, is self-explanatory. The German nation suddenly attacks poor Malaysia and starts to rape them left, right and center because Germans have submachine guns and what appears to be armored battle wagons Model 4, while Somalians have only carbines and Old Renaults. It appears all hope is lost for our Mercurian brethren, but suddenly a wild lesbian appears with the powers of I kill everything with telekinesis. Pfft, amateurs. And in between all the glorious battlefield, we have politics, fan service, and homosexuality. Seriously, almost every important character is like that. Even local Hitler clearly fucks his... whoever the fuck he is. Did he even have a name? You know, I even kinda liked the anime at first. It had a certain spark in it. Even if after seeing our protests for the first time I said, well, one of you is gonna die a very brutal and heroic death. My bet's on the big-titted one. And then the show started to lose its magic. I always like to watch myself and slowly analyze my disappointment in a product. It's a good mental gymnastics. I recommend you trying that. So analyzing my view time, I saw that the show stopped to amuse me somewhere on 4th episode when I've started to guess parts of characters' dialogue. By 7th episode, I was noticing that the anime had only 3-4 musical tracks that looped infinitely and that the budget went on anything but the animation. And after the 8th episode, when they showed in a subplot that is usually stretched for an entire book, I've realized that the anime won't be able to surprise me anymore. I mean, what can I say when this is the most effective unit in the entirety of the show? When it was revealed that suddenly Nazis are so awesome that they can clone long dead people and use them in battle, I was barely half awake. And that's about it, really. The anime reeks low budget, and I wouldn't care much about that, but the script is by itself weak and somewhat hasty, like they were whipped to work faster and were cutting corners wherever they could. The fact that this is an original work only worsens the situation. None of the characters have managed to hook me. No one with the exception of Finne and Izetta is written properly, and the Second World War is shown from the perspective of Western Front at best, if not downright denying the existence of any other fronts, which by itself is pretty ironic and can tell you a lot about Japanese nationalism. From my point of view, nationalism's biggest sin, flaw, and any idea whose basic principles lie in the concept of one nation, usually called banned something as a whole, is that it gives people who believe in it an unjustified sense of superiority over everyone else that justifies any action as long as it's deemed appropriate. Such ideas are like viruses, affect the human nervous system and make them unconsciously spread it to other humans. And what's better than that, you ask? On one hand, nothing at all. Nationalism bonds people, countries, nations together, makes them view each other not as enemies but as allies, allowing them to accept their ideas, language, beliefs, and culture, bringing closer that horrible day when humanity unites into one nation. Disgusting! On the other hand, it leaves humans in a state I personally associate with what you experience while being drugged. Right now, you feel yourself the happiest person alive, stronger than any other of those primitive savages that reject what seems to you so logical and right. But sooner or later, this period in your life will end, and in its place comes disappointment, incomprehension, bitterness, and passiveness. Byzantium, Turkey, Germany, ex-USSR states, and yes, Japan had it perhaps the worst for the last centuries. Of all people, they should understand, the moment these fragile uninations crumble is when they are replaced with depression, defaults, and trips to Aokigahara. But I digress. Best anime, 10 out of 10, want to rape and mutilate every citizen of San Marino, including their livestock and household appliances. Have a nice day. Well, time to review a lesser-known release from this season, Occultic 9. Lesser known because compared to some sports anime about ice skating Russians or the new porn from here on Dakota, I never heard about this thing and neither did my employees. Even Izetta had more spotlight, I think. It doesn't matter anyway. Occultic 9 is an anime from universe from the same studio that tells us a story about misadventures of some blogger and a bunch of random people that you'll either won't remember anyway or just ignore. But since characters here are at last important, here's a quick description of them. Blogger, militant atheist, fortune teller, journalist whose face to me is for some reason quite familiar, not sure why though, and a schoolboy that desperately tries to mimic Sherlock Holmes. The rest of these characters either don't do anything useful or it's better to not tell about them for the sake of surprise. I would start retelling the plot here, but the problem is that this is one of those weird anime. The plot here is convoluted and sometimes doesn't make a lick of sense, but as a whole quite simple and can be retold with ease. The problem here is that if I do that, there'll be no point of view to watch it. If this was a bad or mediocre anime, I would do that without any problem, but here the plot is the best part of the anime, so the only thing that I will tell you is I liked it. What I didn't like is that they copied the adapted visual novel too much, from the animation style to the storytelling aspect. Everything in this anime is fast, the frames change rapidly, one scene can last for a couple of minutes, just viewed from different angles that can make someone either motion sick or even trigger an epileptic seizure, and the information is dumped on you from a machine gun, something that although I think is a good thing considering the amount of text, people that are used to talk like sloth will definitely find annoying. The storytelling in general reminded me of a visual novel called Danganronpa. And not in the best way. The plot of Danganronpa, in case if you don't know, is similar to that of the Occultic 9. We have a bunch of pretty characters whose age range from teens to young adults, and they have a specific task, failing which will result in death, like in Danganronpa, or just bad stuff in case of The problem is that the protagonists of these stories usually are one of two types. They are either always cheerful, optimistic buffoons that annoy everyone around him by simply existing, or they are annoying whiny bitches and the rest of the cast is forced to revolve around him because friendship with him is literally the only thing that they have in common. And the ending is always the same. All these characters, well those that survived anyway, start to depend on him like he's their dealer and placed all their hopes and dreams on him. And while you can say that that's just any hero of any story, first, I suggest you go read some classical literature and not embarrass yourself. And second, it's not the predictability that irks me, it's that all said characters treat you like you're retarded or something. Hey Makoto, do you know about the locked room mystery? It's a type of crime that is committed under circumstances under which it was seemingly impossible for the perpetrator to commit the crime and or evade detection in the course of getting in and out of the crime scene. Yes, Kyoko, I know. I was already told that. 3 times before. 2 of those by you. You stupid, autistic Miss Marple wannabe. There are 2 things in this world that I hate the most. Rasolnik and when someone tells me the same information more than once.
Aber Anti, nicht jeder ist so klug und einzigartig wie du. Jemand kann doch auch das Spaß im Hirn haben.
First, if your memory is that bad, why the hell are you reading a detective novel? Second, in a game you can make this easier with tabs. Hyperlinks. Those things that you can click on and make a hint appear. Even in anime, the subtitles exist for a reason. Those who want to read them will either pause the anime or will be able to read them fast enough. Those who don't care won't read it to save their lives. Occultic 9 is almost 40% them hastily dumping plot on the viewer. A plot that he either should have realized by now, or should never even heard of that outside of specialized literature, and that is really annoying. Oh, and the last thing, the ending, which essentially says, read the fucking visual novel. And fuck you too, creators. And fuck you too.
Well, time to sail into the uncharted territories. I don't like sports anime. It and mecha are the only genres of Japanese animation that are just not for me, mostly because I know how they work, and that they usually use the same bunch of cliches, which is, while not that big of a sin if you think about it, still tires me. With sports anime, it's always young and inexperienced orangutan that likes insect sports here very much, is recently enrolled into a super duper synchronized ass-scratching academy or something along those lines, and he's immediately listed into the worst group, class, dormitory, and he and a bunch of random tag-alongs starts to kick asses of the local elite, possibly becoming one in the process. Add a rivalry with teachers, because unlike the elites they can't just kick their shit, or a rivalry with another academy, where his home is always the outsider, if necessary. And of course, fanbase, the blood and manure of any product. From my experience, a fanbase of any sports anime is made 2% of people who are genuinely interested in this sport, 5% from just passerbys, 25% of fans of other anime that came to tell you that your anime is shit, and the rest 68% 100% screaming hordes that want to see their favorite characters to violently fuck each other in the ass. Because of this, I always thought that asking my opinions about a sports anime is like asking a Buddhist opinions about Consolamentum. Still, when I heard the reaction my female employer had on Yuri on Ice, that sounded like a hellish mix of a human cry, roar of an angry bull, and manatee's mating call, I realized that if I want to have a new mask this spring, I will have to review it. So I watched it, and Keijo that went in the same season, I think, and now we will compare the two, even if you think that the comparison isn't exactly fair. My show, my rules. In case if the opening and the logo wasn't obvious enough, Yuri on Ice is an anime about figure skating, which by itself is a pretty interesting choice considering that skating is one of those sports that never gets enough attention in the media, because if I want to see people in pretty costumes jumping on ice, I will travel to Norway and watch their military parade. Keijo, on the other hand, is an anime about, well, Keijo, a new sport where females in swimsuits must force each other out of a circular ring in the middle of a swimming pool using only their asses and breasts. So essentially a slightly complicated sumo for gymnasts. The first reaction most people will probably have about this anime is boobs, which I think is a little bit unfair towards Keijo. If fucking ice dancing, bobsleigh and StarCraft are considered sport, why can't this be? Putin in Gazduma tells us a story about a Japanese named Yuri Katsuki that starts already as a pretty trained skater that wants to win a Grand Prix, and after a series of circumstances, he gets Viktor Nikiforov, a 5-time skating champion and a super homosexual, as his personal trainer that openly states that he's doing this because he wants our protagonist. I mean, just look at this face. This is the face of a man saying, "I will fuck you tonight, and without a condom." But unfortunately not everything is so awesome, because evil Russian Yuri also wants a piece of that ass, and so a rivalry ensues between them that quickly turns into a friendship. Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you, there are Russians in this anime, and you know what that means? Be prepared to witness all sorts of butchering of local language. That is fine to Japanese and Western barbarians, but Russians? Ah, fuck Russians! They're all stupid and their ice skaters all use heroin or whatever the fuck they do there. Meanwhile, Ars tells us about Jade and Yuki and, no, wait, wrong anime. Remember what I said about sports anime earlier? All of that, only forgot to mention that apparently they all use techniques straight out of Naruto or Dragon Ball Z. Characters in Grandpa and Grandma are surprisingly well written. I think I should warn anyone who haven't watched this yet. This anime tells a story about homosexuals and their homosexual love of homosexuals, no matter what people might say about it. And although there are no scenes of clear penetration, every single character arc can be more or less summed up as such. But unlike Japanese stuff made specifically for that, there is no unnecessary drama. Yuri, and Victor's relationship is pretty romantic, in a classical, literally meaning of the term, for which the writers should be rewarded. Like comedy, it takes talent to write a romantic story from which people won't want to bath. Meanwhile, BJ's main protagonists are Naruto, Shikamaru Nara, Orihime, and Nico Robin. There is also a character named Kawaii Cannabis, but that's all I can remember. Both titles suffer from the same thing. Every named character is colorful, pretty, has his own techniques, speaking style, and inner monologues about how fucking awesome he is. And somewhere in the middle of the show, you just start turning your brain off during these scenes and skip large parts of the cast entirely. There are no homosexuals here, but there is an ungodly amount of fan service. But what did you expect from a show about girls punching each other with their asses? And since authors clearly knew their target audience, they also shoved all manners of references to other titles, from not that obvious to in your face, bitch. And the last thing worth talking about is the graphics, average in both anime. In Petya, this is especially noticeable during the figure skating scenes. It's like their movement lacked either speed or animation frames, so I could clearly see the moments where the aforementioned frames were changing, which was slightly annoying. In Mansada, every single strike was accompanied with bright colors and flashes that made my eyes hurt and head wobble. This was made deliberately. In the first one, to demonstrate the smoothness of the character's moves. Otherwise, the audience would simply miss all those tollops, salchos, and the difference between them. In second one, it was made to demonstrate the characters or their technique's strength. From a practical standpoint, I see the reasoning behind it, but what difference does it make if most people are watching this show for entirely different reasons? At its worst, both animes are just mediocre flicks whose only redeeming qualities are their theme and the fact that fanservice and non-traditional sexual relationships will always be popular, because let's be honest here, none of you who watched this show will go lift weights or in an ice ring afterwards. You'll go write fanfiction depicting characters doing something lewd. But at its best, these two animes are pretty awesome advertisement for sports, usually glossed over by mass media, and if you discard your typical Christian bigotry, shows a decent example of how to write human relationships or a perspective sport. Which one of those is more accurate is up to you to decide. As for me, watching these two animes reminded me of the time I watched a girl try to eat a bowl of spaghetti with a big dildo. Entertaining to watch, but overall pointless and stupid. So we have two more anime from the last season to go, praise the Lord. And first, his Flip Flappers. But what is this Flip Flap to which they erse? Flip-flap is a type of toy that dances, sings, and works on sun energy, a type of dribbling in football, a Left 4 Bun's album and song, and of course the sound your ballsack makes if you shake it too much. Unfortunately, the anime Flip-flappers is not about some football-playing plants with a French accent that work as urologists in their spare time. It's an anime about two underage girls ski each other, very much with some pretty pictures in the background. That's right, folks, another anime that wants to be weird, or as people like to call it nowadays, art house, where everything is so unusual but at the same time colorful, pretty, noisy, and like most of modern art house, offers nothing of value except for pretty pictures. Let's just quickly finish this mess so I can go and do something useful. The plot here is simple. There is a coconut. Coconut grows on a tree and doesn't want to contribute to society in any way, shape, or form. There's paprika, a hot spice that mixed with coconut makes people shit really hard, but as usual that never stopped anyone before. In this anime though, mixing paprika with coconut makes people also really fucking high, and after they stop convulsing, they say that they were in the world of pure illusion, which is essentially Wonderland only made in Japan. Oh, and coconut leaves can spontaneously turn people into moss colonies. Incoherent drivel? It's art house, what did you expect? I am of course taking the piss, but the plot here is the weakest part of the show, mostly because it's so random and fast-paced. Essentially, all episodes with the exception of the last 3 follow the same template. Kokona and Paprika go into a parallel dimension of whatever the current writer wanted to parody or allude to that day. There, they in like 15 minutes do what a competent show would do in 2-7 episodes, and that's about it. Other elements of the plot and characters, to put it bluntly, are useless and shoved in just for the sake of it, and if the authors couldn't be bothered, then why should I? Well, and of course, the ending was fucking retarded, perhaps because the budget for it was wasted on whatever type of moonshine they drank. I won't spoil it, but for the sake of analogy, imagine that you play a game like old Ninja Turtles or Devil May Cry, and in order to proceed to the final boss, you have to kill again all the previous bosses from the other levels, even if the final boss himself isn't that big of a threat. If I'm remembering it correctly, this is called boss rush, and that to me is a clear sign of laziness. This is essentially means that authors ran out of patience, inspiration, or crack cocaine, and now they desperately want to shit out whatever it is left to do and forget about the project like a bad dream. And what's most offensive in this is that otherwise the product is fairly decent. The graphics are not bad, the music is meh, but for once I wasn't skipping both the opening and the ending. But you can have the prettiest graphics in the world, hire the best musicians, and the Roman Pope himself can personally deep-throat you if your story can be at best described as meh, then you might as well could give your budget money to homeless people or the government. Flip-flappers can be used to explain the current state of art over the last 2 centuries. The reason why Cubism became more popular while Dadaism died during its infancy is not because one was more colorful, but because as a style, Cubism was more complete. You can insert as much references to Young or call rabbits with German aristocracy names as you want. Without a coherent story, it's all nothing more than senseless ramblings. And for the most part, people don't like senseless ramblings, they like ramblings coated in tartar sauce. I think many will agree with me on this one. There is not a lot of options for guaranteed profit in the entertainment industry nowadays. You can either make something with such broad mass market appeal that only someone washed hipsters that furiously wank on some prehistoric shit like 12 Kingdoms and make shitty music videos in their spare time might dislike. Or you make something for a specific group of outcasts, for whom any little scrap of content is akin to manna from the sky. Or you do one specific thing so well that the people who are into that have no choice but to come to you for it. A business strategy that works well for these Gabonese prostitutes and for Hirana Kota, who have been doing one specific thing for decades now. Thankfully, watching epic men of questionable morality and big-breasted women in mini-shorts brutally kill people for the sin of having a different opinion while screaming that Hitler did nothing wrong is exactly my type of entertainment. It's somewhat refreshing, plus reminds me of the sweet, sweet future where I will gut my employers and rape their corpses. But I digress. Drifters is Hellsing, but with more historical people in the world of typical Western fantasy. Here's your bloodthirsty but pretty straightforward guy whose motivation begins and ends on killing shit. Here's your butler friend that will obviously betray you at some point, I mean just fucking look at this face. Here's your big-titted female that, while can fight, is the object of constant boob jokes. Here's your leader of some vaguely defined organization who's determined, serious, and ready to do anything for the cause. The list, as you've probably guessed already, goes on. Here I would start retelling you the plot, but well, it is effectively the same plot from Hellsing. The difference is that our protagonists don't have any superpowers, unless not acting like spoiled infants is considered to be a superpower these days. You won't believe, but folks that commanded armies for most of their adult life or made some legendary deeds are not to be fucked with. What's also interesting is that the characters themselves are decently written and act closely to their popular historical image, even while commenting and joking about others. Truth to be told, I wasn't expecting for someone in Japan to know the story of Bluebeard or poor little Anastasia, even if they weren't shown like their historical
historical counterparts. If I would criticize something, it's that for all the luster that Drifter's enemies are producing, they aren't doing anything of particular value or use. If Black King was the only superpowered guy in the enemy team while the rest of them were the same as Drifters, it would be much more interesting. Nobody's going to be impressed by fireballs these days. In other aspects, it's a typical work of Hirano Kota and his studio, from graphics and music to atmosphere and dialogue. If you liked Hellsing, his older works, or you just like to watch very graphical scenes of violence, then this anime is for you. If you're more of a cute and fluffy type, or one of those weird people that won't eat themselves until they feed their giant Gundam or something like that, then it's best that you skip it. Phew. Well, the last anime of 2016 is finally dealt with. Let's hope that 2017 will be more productive to you, listeners, and as for me, brings more interesting titles worthy of my time. Oh, god fucking damn it! Bakemonogatari review ordered by user NDDitko that apparently won a contest that I made in my Occultic 9 ramblings. Why am I telling you this? Because for the next few weeks we're gonna dive into the pile that is things that people wanted me to review. And I am a man of my word, even if said word was given not by me, but by a man who merely uses my name. The name of the client will be told because I know that eventually one of you bastards will order a Boku no Pico review, and I will make sure that everyone else knows who to blame. And now, Monster Stories. Chosen because chronologically it was the first in this series, Monster Stories is one of those legendary status anime similar to Evangelion, Akira, Holy Trinity, and their ilk, whether you like it or not. It's rational for me to think that most of you who listen to this recording heard about this anime at least from recommendations or legends surrounding the series, but if not, here's the plot briefly. This is a story about a boy named Araragi Koyomi that has a sometimes suicidal habit to save lives of random girls he sees on the streets, after which they become part of his personal harem. Seriously, one of the girls says that she is his sex slave in front of a hall of people, which should tell you a lot about both the humor of the show and their relationship. And I must say that I kinda like the anime, even if it is effectively nothing but a panopticon of sexual fetishes and incoherent dialogues that would make your average viewer think that he watches the adventures of some first graders with a very lively imagination. But the client wanted to know why people love it so much, and so I'll try to explain it as best as I can. If something like success from birth exists in this world, then this anime should be one of its poster children, because the parents of this anime are quite the characters themselves. Nishio Ishin is one of the few Japanese writers that I actually read and liked, in many ways thanks to his wordplay. He manages to write his characters more realistic and alive. At least most people who I tend to work with also have a habit to terribly joke or try to kill me. The studio that created Monster Stories, Shaft, is my second favorite anime studio after Gainax, that specializes on eccentric anime, and considering the text of the stories, there is no better studio for it. I also should mention the visual style of the anime that is a good example of how to do art house properly. Despite all the weirdness, strange slides, and the city itself, architect of which was clearly influenced by old Morris and op art, there is nothing here that was placed just because. Every location has a purpose and is drawn in a way that doesn't hurt my eyes. The only bad thing I can say about it is that constant jump cuts often made me reminiscent of the Rift War. Structure is also one of anime's strong points. It's made as a bunch of loosely related stories that you can watch in any order, which to me is a good thing. Viewer can watch, for example, the first story about a crab and decide whether to continue or not. Monogatari series is a good example of what happens if you make an anime not only good technically, but also with a soul. But can I recommend it to people? That's a tricky question. Monogatari is like vegetarianism. It exists, and people that like it can tell you 30 million reasons as to why eating soy is kosher, but in the end of the day, it depends on individual basis. Some people just don't like how soy tastes. Some people have specific health problems, so they can't eat only vegetarian stuff. Some people despise all of these pompous douchebags that try to tell them how to live their life and will eat meat out of sheer principle. My advice here is the same. Watch the first 3 episodes about crabs and make your own decisions, like or dislike. I kinda have the same opinion about orgies. Outlaw Star review ordered by user Yevgaz, that is, if I understood correctly from my employer's dialogue, a very important person in Ukrainian anime industry, or fan base, something along those lines. The client ordered a lot of anime to review, and I can see that he likes anime from those times when anime industry was effectively a Wild West, where any shit could fly, provided they got enough dosh. But I'm not the one to judge, and work is work. Outlaw Star is a science pop/space western of the late 90s, and I can already feel the sour taste in my mouth. Japanese almost never made a decent western without destroying it with Deus Ex Machina or some other mystical crap. The show happens in a world where humanity had conquered space and spread all over it like cockroaches, especially Chinese, that are so numerous that not only their pirates are one of the world powers, but they also built their own empires somewhere on the hinterlands. I will never understand why Japanese have such weird stereotypes about pirates and... oh, I forgot. There are 3 main heroes, although the show desperately tries to make us think that there's 5 of them. Jean Starwind, the captain that is essentially every main hero of every space western ever. A dashing man with a good eye and a crack shot that doesn't want to do more than he needs, but life's a bitch, and he's the inseminator. His little companion, Jim Hawking, is 10 times smarter than our captain and the brains of the team. Essentially, he is what would happen if Edward Elric fucked Arnold. And then there are the females, or as I like to call it, the source of entertainment during long flights. Melfina, a magical MacGuffin that helps controlling the ship, and that every 2-5 episodes goes the usual, "Who am I? What am I? Why am I?" Suzuki, a samurai chick that can cut through steel with a wooden sword, and Aisha, a cacao. No, not that. Fuck it, it's a Klingon female and about as useful as one. And after fighting pirates that make One Piece pirates look realistic and serious, our heroes become the local variation of a mercenary, and while searching for a great treasure, do jack shit 26 episodes in a row. Every cliché is here. No money, everything is expensive, people want to eat, females want to be molested. There's nothing wrong with that, mind you, it kinda comes with the genre, I just have to confirm that they are indeed here. When I consume a product, my only criteria on which I make my judgment is, did I enjoy consuming it? I try to not use some pointless bullshit like points or scales, because I am somewhat an optimist. I'd believe that people of the 21st century, unless of course they're mentally deficient, should have their own head on their shoulders and not make their decisions based on some numbers, unless those numbers are caliber 1. But unfortunately, modern technology doesn't yet allow me to replace the consciousness of every human with mine, so I have to think about other criteria, like, would an anime fan that likes Konosuba, Star Wars, and kawaii pictures like it, you know, the lumpen proletariat of our anime society. And since this is also an old anime, one has to ask another question. Is there a point watching it in whatever year you watch this recording? And before people that like this anime will mob me, I do not regret my spent time, but at the same time I wasn't overly impressed by it either. There is nothing in this anime that definitely hooked me. The characters are unremarkable and never go beyond their respective cliches. The space battle scenes are too rare to attract a hardcore battle scene enthusiast, too unrealistic to attract a hardcore sci-fi fan, and the ship's design is too boring for any person that likes mechas and such. The biggest flaw of this anime, in my opinion, is that it's 26 episodes long, while they could do that all in 15-16. The anime has tons of strange scenes of nothing. When they show you a thing, tell you about it, and then just pause for a couple of seconds, and almost every action they do is done in a way that makes me yell, "Well, that was fucking pointless!" If you like sci-fi stuff in the same way most people like Star Wars, then perhaps you'll find something in this, I don't know. In my opinion, Japan made a lot of space opera that's infinitely better than this. This is why I don't like rambling about old anime. As a market, it's kinda occupied, that's one. And two, it won't take long till you start reusing old jokes, cause what else can you say about it? Everything worth criticizing and praising in old anime was criticized and praised long before some of my listeners were even born. And those that like it have stopped listening to me on the first minute or so. It's training gorillas in Mozambique all over again. Now you see why these pauses are annoying. Mirai Nikki review ordered by user Alexei Stepanishev, whose family name irrationally annoys me. This is why I hate Europeans. Why can't they make short surnames that are easy to remember, like Balette, Orocco, Fosso? Short, good sounding, and I don't have to relive the Battle of Mala Yaroslavets just to recall how to pronounce the damn things. But it doesn't matter. The client will correct me, provided that he cares. We move from an era dominated by hardcore men to an era dominated by wusses, but before the economic crisis forced them to move to a 12-series format. Mirai Nikki is ostensibly a story about a guy named Amano Yukiteru, an antisocial schoolboy that does nothing but writes his diary on a phone and talks to his imaginary friend. The god of space and time, Deus Ex Machina, yes I know. And either out of pity or for fun, Deus sends him a text message in the real world and gives him a so-called future diary. Essentially the same phone diary where everything is written 90 hours ahead, effectively allowing them to see the future. And just a quick note, if your imaginary friends start to send you text messages, then either change the number or stop thinking that they're imaginary. But since watching Adventures of a Crybaby with a cheat sheet would be boring, Deus also gives similar diaries to other people and declares a deathmatch. The winner gets to replace him as the god of space and time. And now let me repeat myself. In order to find himself a replacement, the god of space and time gave 12 future-predicting devices to monsters that forbade their humanity due to constant abuse, and useful idiots that either have no or only the faintest clue about what they're getting themselves into, and tells them go get 'em. Genius plan, Deus. I would applaud, but the hands of this body are chained to a stool. There are two main heroes. Kinda. Our dear idiot and his quote-unquote girlfriend, Yuno Gasai, who from the first episodes shows that mentally she's not the healthiest person around. Effectively, she is the main hero of the story, and that's not even a spoiler, just look at the posters and poll results. Why do I call him an idiot? Because the English language doesn't have a word that can describe the levels of idiocy of our main hero, and that's why sentences exist. A retarded shrew mouse! This motherfucker makes Subaru Natsuki look credible in comparison. Say what you want about him, but at least he was learning from his mistakes after the third, fourth time. This sample of Japanese ass lickers not only doesn't learn from his mistakes, he outright denies them even when everybody, including the world around him, yelled that he's an idiot. I am fucking surprised how he didn't break his phone by accident due to his stupidity. And I'm not even gonna start on the ending, cause major spoilers mostly, but I'll say this. The god from the machine here is so big and fat that he can be used as a seismic bomb. So as you've probably guessed already, I had fun watching this anime and I can wholeheartedly recommend it. Wait, what? Many of you think that I don't like anime, mostly because of my tone, but it's incorrect. I'm harsh, but fair. Even though our main hero is the main reason why Japan will devolve into a bunch of warring city-states in a few decades, this anime is not only well written, but also made decently. The 12 diary owners are written in a way that a viewer can even pity them, and even though that's kinda standard for these sorts of anime, it actually rarely works because their motivation is all over the place. Here, however, every character acts like a human being, even those that do eccentric stuff. The graphics are decent for this genre, the music is unremarkable but serves its purpose, the plot competently alternates between serious shit and comedy, and the battles between diary owners are not only a spectacle but also can be pretty tense. And even though I despise the ending, from a purely structural point of view it's not that bad. It gave answers to every important question and the characters had an ending they deserve. Even the 26 series format is not out of place here, and unlike Outlaw Star, it neither overstays its welcome or is left unfinished and requires continuation. Watching Mirai Nikki, I couldn't but notice the striking similarities with ReZero and other shows that I watched or will watch, and that's good from one side, and on the other tells us a lot about the current state of the entertainment industry, both Japanese and international. Even though many people want to believe otherwise, an information age human, especially in the so-called developed countries, is while capricious, painfully predictable. He is very easy to please, but the second some company finds that perfect pleasing recipe, this all follows one of the two scenarios. Either they immediately oversaturate the market and blow it to smithereens, or they will drip feed you their content, but simultaneously, which will result in homogenization and will scare off the consumer. The result is always the same. The industry suffers a brain drain, studios go bankrupt, and people complain not realizing what happened. The fact that a product from 2011 feels almost the same as a product from 2016-2017 is not a bad thing inherently, but tells us a lot about our favorite industry, for better or worse.
Irresponsible Captain Tyler review ordered by user Yevgas, whose name more and more reminds me of a Soviet car. If the client wishes to tell me the meaning of his name, do tell! I'll say it in the next video, because if my memory serves me right, there's 2 more orders from you and I have a creeping suspicion that I'll run out of jokes in the last one and start insulting your mum. Irresponsible Captain Tyler happens God knows where in the year 6999, where united humanity, 100% conquered by Japan mind you, is in war with a space Muslim empire, because 6999 or 1993, it doesn't matter much. There are only 2 constant problems in the first world: Muslims and communists, especially if they're Russians. Our main hero, Justy Tyler, is a bastard son of SpongeBob and Captain Picard. So in search of an easy life, he enlists in a space fleet that with each episode will more and more remind you of the Japanese Navy during World War II, because it's about as effective for the same reasons. But since this is son of SpongeBob and Picard, heart we're talking about. Instead of, I don't know, go to an academy or work as a janitor on some ship, he's immediately given the most broken and derelict ship in the entire fleet, with the crew just as bad, and is told to kill enemies for motherland. Besides our main hero, there is not a lot of characters to work with, but they're generally quite memorable, both in their looks and their behavior. But since telling you about them would spoil all the fun, I'll tell you only about the second closest after the captain: Squidward and Princess Leia. To be honest with you, I was pleasantly surprised with this anime. At first I thought that this is yet another stupid comedy. The only difference is that the humor here looks like one from an American stand-up comedian. But from the third episode I realized that first, this is a classical savant satire, and second, you won't believe when I say it, a pure-blood science fiction. Yeah, I wasn't expecting that myself. There's nothing here that usually annoys people in anime. No fillers, no fucking mountains, not even a hot springs episode that these yellow slinty-eyed bastards show wherever they can. If I had to compare, I would say that this anime reminds me of Star Trek the most, but comedy, which some people might like, some people not so much. The anime, of course, isn't perfect. The graphics are very cheap. A lot of scenes, especially the battle ones, are shamelessly copied from one episode to another, and the long pauses that I rambled about in Outlaw Star are here as well. Although, compared to the rest of the show, you'll probably won't even notice them. The music here, while serves its purpose, is so typical 90s sci-fi music that music from Soviet science fiction will sound like Beethoven's symphonies, that's one. And two, it made me reminiscent of Monty Python and Sesame Street with all its ups and downs, along with Star Trek Deep Space Nine opening. Disgusting. The critique about realism also stands, but unlike Gene, this show doesn't hide the fact that its space setting has less influence on the plot and more influence on authors' chances of not getting arrested for state treason. Irresponsible Captain Tyler is a good anime. Shows like these fill my non-existent heart with, let's call it hope for a better future, and reminds me that for all the pink-haired, yelling schoolboy wimps from another world with magic powers on a robot with a female in his teeth, anime is still worth defending. Will I recommend this to a younger audience? If you like shows like Star Trek, Firefly, or Doctor Who, then I'll say yes. You won't find anything new, but you'll certainly have fun watching it. The rest, though, watch it at your own risk. You see, client, old anime is like wine. It might get better with years, but if you overdo, it'll turn into vinegar, and that shit is bad for your stomach, but it's a good ingredient for explosives. Your name review, ordered by user Alexei Stepanishev. Ah, you lazy bastards! Instead of going through the entire list like decent human beings, you gave me a list consisting from 2 people. No sense of work duty, although, kinda thinking about it, not that I can blame them. They don't show these anime to me like normal people. They chain me, shove me into the screen, and run for their lives. But, oh well. Your Name is a feature-length movie distributed by Toho. Ah, yeah, I forgot. Most of you people probably don't even know who the hell they are. Well, long story short, they're a big and evil Japanese corporation that is similar to Disney. Back in the day, they made more or less decent works, but now most of what they publish is akin to fast food. It's edible and possibly even tasty, but you'll still feel hungry after consuming it. And that's kinda the opinion I have about Your Name as well. The story tells us about 2 humans named, how were they called again? Mitsuha and Taki, right. And they have a problem. Well, to be specific, Mitsuha has a problem. She's tired of living in this shitty backwater village and wants to live in the capital. And apparently gods were very bored that day and decided to grant her wish, and now she switches bodies with Tako a few times a week, a Tokyo resident and generally your typical big city dweller. So they effectively just bumble around in their bodies and so on and etc. Hello, every average woman melodrama of the last 2 decades or so, and par with films of that Indian guy whose family name I constantly forget. The biggest flaw of this anime is its plot, ruthless in its pointlessness, but thinking that it's the next big thing. Most of the things happening in the anime either make no sense or such blatant foreshadowing that I'm getting sick just by thinking about it. Ah, the word Twilight is written in this way! Ah, this balding bush is the body of our deity and a gate to another world! Ah, you have to learn how to use explosives! Yes, I get it, movie. You're not directed by Stanley Kubrick. I don't have to have an encyclopedia on my lap to understand what's happening. You're God knows how many miles away from each other, and judging by several nuances in different timelines as well, and the girl is probably dead, because your anime or movie can be from Upper Volta Republic for all I care. Traditional narrative structure is called traditional for a reason, and since you live in bumfuck nowhere, then there is not a lot of ways this can go, don't you agree? The same thing with the music and the characters. The first is so obnoxious that in the end it seriously started to annoy, and I had a creeping suspicion that this was made deliberately to stretch the movie to almost 2 hours length.
and the characters are just bland. The name of the movie is just on point. You'll forget the names of Mivina and Takayaki the next day after you watch it. And that's not saying about the secondary characters, whose names I'm too lazy to even Google, that's how bland and forgettable they were. The only good thing I can say, the graphics and animation are well made, but considering that, if I remember it correctly, this anime was created with love by the author of the book of the same name, then it should be of no surprise to you. In fact, I think that everyone should be like this with any project in general. This feature-length anime in many ways reminded me of Kisniver. Like Kisniver, this anime was made first and foremost with Western viewer in mind. Like Kisniver, it's watchable, will have its fans, hell, it probably might even have a positive score from the critics, most of which are probably bribed. The average anime fan, especially if it's of female sex, will watch it once, cry sadly into a pillow, passionately write something like OMG 10 out of 10, and will go do whatever it is he does usually, forgetting what he was even doing for the previous 2-3 hours. However, this anime has one main positive thing that it shares with the Twilight movies. If you want to watch something with your girlfriend but don't want to have sex afterward, then this anime is for you. Fire and Ice review ordered by user Yevgas, who's apparently a massive tsundere and thinks that there is no point in telling us the meaning of his name. Well, suit yourself. I'm not gonna pry you open. After all, as long as you keep your integrity in service, then it's all okay, right? Fire and Ice is an American cartoon from the 80s, filmed almost entirely with rotoscoping, so it looks as if these drawn characters move like live-action ones. It tells us an epic story in that childish "and then there was a evil wizard" sort of way that long ago in the distant world there was a big blue bitch, whose bitchiness was so big that it turned into a man, and after 9 months of intensive hate-fucking, a baby was born under the name of Necron. No, not that Necron, the one that looks like a byproduct of artists and Yuri Plisetsky. And since even in the ancient barbaric wilderness it's kinda stupid to abandon your own child, the blue bitch raised him and taught him everything he needs to know about life. Walk in a loincloth, swing a sword, call everyone a subhuman, and spellcast like you're coming inside something all the time. I mean, no wonder he acts so gay. If my spells could give me orgasms every time I conjure them, I would also probably ignore the opposite sex. But I digress. Seeing that the King of the North is some kind of sodomite, the other half-naked barbarians decided, nah, fuck that, and ran away to another country, which is already better than what most Hillary voters did after the election. And now it's full-on war between kingdoms of fire and ice. And I'm telling you this because for the most part, even the film itself doesn't care about all of this in the slightest. But I'll come to this later, we still have a bit of plot to cover. Our main hero is a half-naked barbarian who decided that his balls are big enough to charge into a fucking ice wall with predictable results. And after that, he meets Batman, and Batman saves the day. The end. So in case you haven't figured it out already, the plot is all over the place, makes no sense, and what little of it that makes sense is so dreadfully classical 80s pulp fiction that many modern teenagers and all those whiny little Europeans would commit suicide the moment they saw it. I fucking love it! And if you came here for some meaningful drama, rich and vast fantasy world, or some other nonsense, then get the fuck out of here, you filthy hipsters! There is no drama or good written characters in this movie. There is no memorable music besides the also favorite There is no world to speak here. Only subhumans grabbing asses of half-naked barbarians and female body galore. And you know what's the most awesome thing about this movie? The thing that I myself noticed only recently and decided to keep it for dessert? All of this mess was directed by this fucker. Yes, Ralph Bakshi, the man that most of you probably don't know because he's one of those indie art house directors. But what makes him stand out from all the other dregs is that he actually believed that animation is not only for kids but also can be used for adult entertainment. A thing that he and I agree on, but since most of his more famous works were made in the 80s, that means that in many cases for adults meant that your characters said fuck a lot, had sex, or just flashed tits everywhere, and you basically know the drill. Things haven't changed a lot from those times, both in style and in substance. The problem with these art house films is that they have an extremely limited lifespan. Of course, there will always be people that either watched it as kids / young adults or just like trashy art house films and will defend it to death. But ultimately, these films offer nothing except their trashiness or pulpiness in case of Fire and Ice. A characteristic that can be easily toppled and in many cases have already been toppled. Modern things like Sharknado or the various shit that Bollywood makes is infinitely better than The Room in both style and execution. And while one can argue that we don't exactly get get a lot of half-naked barbarians riding dinosaurs and saving sexy chicks these days. I say that the market for these sorts of things is oversaturated as it is, that's one. And two, modern people aren't that easily pleased like before. Just because you have Frank Frazetta as your producer doesn't mean that people will like your shit. In fact, many people today prefer more polished look over the dirty, gritty-looking stuff. So as a finishing word, if you generally like trashy pulp fiction, then I suggest you watch it. Otherwise, avoid it like an orgasming naked wizard. Ping pong review ordered by, I don't know, some guy that my employees found. I'm currently experiencing what I like to call the finishing wary, where you know that what you do comes to an end and you're getting either overly relaxed or overly anxious. The same with me now. I just want to be done with this as soon as possible and kill myself, or whatever is popular with kids these days. Ping Pong is an anime about 5 people playing table tennis. One of them is autistic, one of them is a trickster, and the rest are effectively side characters whose only purpose is to provide context and different opinions/experience on basically the same dilemma. The moral of this story is that there is no reason to try hard as much because nothing ever good comes out of it, and the most important thing is to simply have fun while doing something you like while you're young, because eventually it'll end, and then what? All of this is accompanied by a very decent soundtrack, genuinely entertaining matches of ping pong, and a few things that I effectively never saw in an anime, like a Chinese person actually talking in Chinese. I know, shocking. Characters and structure are the strongest features of this anime. During my time watching this, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I'm not watching an anime, but watching a Western movie instead. Not intended for Western audience, mind you, but a genuine film akin to Forrest Gump or any of the earlier Tarantino works. Its pacing, along with the way most of the characters talk, is probably the reason why I thought like this, but I can't say that I wasn't happy by it. In fact, this makes the characters seem more down to earth, but not overly realistic, which in return makes them more relatable, especially if the viewer is a sportsman himself or is working in similar fields. Overall, this is a good anime and, yes. Almost forgot that casuals are also probably listening to this. Yes, the graphics here are a bit artsy, and that might severely displease you, especially if you're one of those people who think that graphics come first and the rest can go fuck itself. I personally never had a problem with the show's style. I would even argue that the usual way would actually damage the show, but I'm a mask, so what do I know? But even if you can tolerate shows' unorthodox look, you might experience the same problems many people have with the aforementioned Forrest Gump and early Tarantino movies. Most people find them fucking boring and slow. Oh, this guy is a retard and his life is more or less good. Well, boo fucking hood. Don't you know that nowadays like 90% of all British children are being molested by Pakistani politicians? This is a show about a bunch of criminals that done fucked up. Oh, go cry me a river. Who cares about criminals these days? What is it, 1940s? Don't you know that there's a gender gap or hackers or whatever you modern intelligentsia talk about these days? The same here. This is an anime about guys playing ping pong and who the fuck plays ping pong in 2017? I didn't know that such sport even fucking existed. Fucking StarCraft players are more popular than you. So what, the things that happening in this show is what professional sportsmen have to deal with on regular basis? Who cares? If they lose today, they're gonna try again next year. It's not so important. And you know what's actually important? Ranting about Muslims and feminists. I mean, it gets the views and subscribers, so why not? Ping pong is an anime cursed to have the cult classic status. Good enough to gather a decent-sized fan base and generally be talked about, not good enough to have a wide public recognition and be learned in schools as the pinnacle of the genre. Most people will probably know about its existence, but never actually touch it, mostly because they're plebs, but also because the show is not good enough for them. My opinions on this are simple. This is probably the best sports show I watched, but in that genre the bar is set so low that it swims with the anglerfishes. And we'll start with what my employers played the most, so I kinda didn't have much of a choice other than to watch it. Card Hunter. Card Hunter is a role-playing game that desperately wants to look like a card game, even if the only thing that this game has in common with them is, well, cards. The plot is about you and a bunch of other idiots playing a local Dungeons & Dragons ripoff with a story straight from the 80s movies about nerds. Here's your shy 4 eyes, here's your rude 4 eyes, here's a female that one of these 4 eyes wants to fuck like a cheap slut but thinks that she deserves better than him. You know, the usual banal stuff, but it serves its purpose. At least I was entertained by their interactions with each other, albeit for entirely different reasons. The gameplay here is also relatively simple. You have a team of 3 characters, healer, warrior, and a mage, and traveling from one dungeon to another, you kill monsters, get loot, equip loot, and overall feel awesome while doing so. And this would be the end of my review if my employer haven't decided to give me my hands back so I can play with them. And so instead of a normal game, we had the adventures of an insane dwarf warrior Dodongo and the elven mage Kururkur that was expelled from her magical university for drowning it in lava. And here you'll probably ask me, but Auntie, isn't this game meant to be played with 3 characters? To which I say that's if you play single player, and 3 characters are for fucking pussies anyway. Any retard can do that. But I digress. The path of Dodongo and Kururkur was a long and tedious one, for your items decide your in-game skills that drop as cards in your deck every turn, and since the great broken Chinese number generator is responsible for giving you cards, not once our heroes suffered a terrible defeat because the fucking game didn't give us the needed cards, or gave them but when they were unnecessary. Meanwhile, the enemies were always supplied with every card ever. Thankfully, our heroes found the perfect victory tactic of pulling as much armor on Dodongo as one can, entrench in a corner, and let those fuckers try to smoke us out of it. I call this tactic Stalingrad. Somewhere in the middle of the game, Dodongo had 2 sets of items that allowed him to transform from a bunch of walking armor into a fast assault trooper. Meanwhile, Kururkur at first tried to be a regular arcane mage, and then she turned into Thor and thunderclapped her way through everyone, as well as throwing lava under the enemies when they were tired of beating Dodongo. But soon our game master got tired from all the cancer we've done, and so he decided to throw more serious enemies at us, namely the fucks that throw acorns of death and troglodytes with spears on plain field without any cover. And it would appear that this is the end for our hero's glorious adventures, but suddenly Dodongo found himself a set of super heavy armor and a helmet that turned all received damage into additional attacks. And from that point on, Dodongo became immortal, and Kururkur started to teleport around the map and throw super lightnings. When the cards were right. And although our GM tried his very best, Dodongo and Kururkur killed all enemies and forced Gary to finally fuck that woman, after which they decided to take a small break because the next dungeon had 20 levels or so and they thought, nah, fuck that shit. Overall, the game is pretty entertaining, and if you like tactical strategies and you don't mind that it's emulating the style of a tabletop RPG, then I suggest you go play it. I should note though that there is only 3 classes in the game, all can be easily customized to kill even the toughest enemies in the game without any problems, and only 3 races, which to me is a very small number. We're playing a tabletop here, god damn it, I want something more than just elves, dwarves, humans. Besides that, many people probably won't like that even though the game says it's a card game, it's less Hearthstone and more commandos. And therefore you have to actually think, otherwise the AI will use you like PewDiePie used American journalists. My employers are a very strange lot, openly discussing and engaging in things that many regular people condone. Although, kinda thinking about it, in their line of work, being unorthodox is probably one of the main things they seek in their work stuff. I'm saying this because the next game that I saw my employers play, and the one that I actually enjoyed both watching and taking part in, is Succubus Wars, or Sakuibazu no Tatakai. Why did a Western developer chose this pseudo-Japanese bullshit name, we will never know. Sakui tells us a story about a daughter of Satan named Eveloria that conquered the entire hell via the almighty powers of fucking and challenged her father for the crown, only to be stripped all of her powers and dumped on some devil's forsaken rock for 1,000 years, jerking off random low-level demons until one of her sisters finds her with a desire to violently murder her for doing things that I am sure is someone's fetish. And now our brave succubus has to kill, corrupt, and fuck her way through hell once again to take what's rightfully hers. Oh, I also forgot to tell you, this is a porn game. Now that all the babies have left the room, let us continue. There are 2 games in this series, both differ in their gameplay. The first one is more of a 2D action game, while the second is a lane turn-based strategy game, but they share one major thing, in that both of these games are ridiculously hard and actually require a bit of skill to play. In the first one, you start with effectively 0 skills, weapons and such, and must kill enemies for souls that are then used to upgrade your character's skills, weapons and such. You level up for every 100 souls, which is the game's way of telling you, grind more, bitch, or else you're dead. Your skills are usually bought in the game menu or unlocked after beating a certain boss or a mini-boss, and like all respectable old-school games, in order to beat a boss, you have to actually remember his patterns and use them to your advantage, unlike most modern games where you can take down almost anything provided that you have enough firepower. The second game is where it gets massive, with you commanding dozens of soldiers against your enemy, and not just regular grunts, but of many races of demons, each having a different special rules and preferred specializations, and if that's not enough for you, 2, there are also mini-quests that require using a specific type of unit to win, a bunch of secret missions that have you play in a specific way in order to get a hero unit, and actually amusing dialogues between different characters, as well as, while not overly new, an interesting take on hell in its landscape. But I hear you ask me, where's the sex? It is a porn game, so it has to have it. And you're right, of course there's sex in the game. In the first one, you rape defeated bosses, and in the second, you have to capture enemy units to gain sex scenes, as well as new recruits into your army, which is a hard task because this can actually cost you a victory. But the funniest part is that sex here is less of a feature and more a reward for killing the fucking boss that obliterated you for like 5-6 times before that. This is what I generally hate in these types of games. Pornographic content in them is usually either a failure state or is effectively the only worthwhile part of the game, and while some might say that's kind of the whole point of a porn game, you know, I call bullshit on that, because a porn game is first and foremost a game and then porn. Otherwise, what's the point of playing it and not going to one of the numerous porn sites and jerk off there? And while I'm not saying that erotic content must be an afterthought in such games, the game has to be fun to play so that the player felt actually rewarded for his hard work, and not deliberately searching for erotica because he has nothing else to do there. When I was playing Sakuibasu both parts, I wasn't thinking about what sort of scene I will jerk off to next. I was learning the patterns and weaknesses of my enemies, and when I finally defeated them, sex was a reward for my suffering, and as a result, much more enjoyable to watch. The games are awesome because they required me to actually think about my actions, not because they had boobies in them. This is why I treat most modern humans as spineless cowards, especially those from the developed countries. Back in my days, acquiring porn of any sort was a matter of meticulous planning, secrecy, and skullduggery, and when you finally gotten those pictures of naked Marilyn Monroe or that tape with erotic striptease, it was considered to be an accomplishment. Nowadays, to get their porn, people go to one of the numerous free online porn video sites, and there's nothing hard in that, unless you consider clicking links to be some sort of sports exercise. And the funniest part is that the porn they have there is not even that good. But people don't care, and why would they? Consumers' job is not caring, it is to consume whatever shit you're getting and asking for more. And those that want to have actually good stuff are doing it the old-fashioned way of contacting producers and actors, writing a script and paying them a lot of dollars for the work. And because of this, erotic production is getting given more stigmatized than before. At least back then it was the matter of morality. Nowadays many people I know don't talk about porn because it's only for masturbating, why? Which is not only a very declamatory statement, but a bigoted one at best. But I rambled on this topic long enough. Both games, while graphically lacking, are fun to play, and if you like things like Dark Souls and such, then I suggest you at least try them. I personally liked the second game more, but I have a bias towards strategies, so it's not that surprising. As long as it's a strategy, I can do almost anything, even take part in anime community dramas.
I have returned!
And unsurprisingly, there were no masks in Himalayas. Why would there be masks in Himalayas? People of that region are either Buddhists or Hindus. They aren't exactly known for their masks. They are known, however, for their archery, monks, and corpse desecration. And this cupola is a good example of this. A cup made out of a human skull to appease whatever deity was pissed at them in that particular day. Fuck knows why they decided to put me in a wine cup of all places, but oh well. At least people can now put bread into me so I can throw it in random equipment. And we start our monthly tour with a new season of Konosuba, because it apparently ended right when we left, and I think the most fanatical cultists have now switched to Attack on Titan Season 2 or whatever the fuck. In case if you haven't watched my review of the previous season, then a quick recap. Konosuba is an adaptation of a light novel written by a girl that features an entire gang of women suffering under dysfunctional habits and bad luck, which makes me wonder why chauvinists haven't picked it up as an example of female inferiority yet. I personally found it to be one of the most boring shows of that season, but not that it mattered much, because people gobbled it up just like I predicted, and now we have the sequel that was long awaited by everyone, especially since the phantom majority of this fucking thing watch anime purely to get rid of their suicidal thoughts. Konosuba 2 starts off where the previous season ended. After killing a bullshit robot, Kazuma Sato is judged in a bullshit trial over some bullshit, and bullshit ensues. And that's literally all the plot. In fact, it's so literally the plot that you don't even have to watch the show itself. If you watched the opening sequence, you've literally experienced the entirety of what the second season has to offer, even the character interactions. But let no one say that I wasn't fair to this show, so let us dive in. The first thing that you will probably notice, compared to the previous season, is that the graphical quality decreased significantly, with characters' faces looking more fat than they used to, as well as having more cartoony expressions and movements. And while some people found this to be a flaw, I personally preferred this style over the style of the first season. season, mainly because the exaggerated features go in tone with their actions and overall personalities. The music, for the most part, is copy-pasted from the first season and is so forgettable that I'm not even sure that there was any to begin with. But you don't watch Konosuba for stunning vistas or extravagant special effects. You watch Konosuba for the funny interactions between a gang of dysfunctional losers as they bumble their way through a bullshit fantasy world, or in other words, comedy. And this is the part where you can see that this show is literally for people like this. Plebeians who can't recognize a good joke from a toilet one to save their fucking lives. Let me dissect to you the entirety of Konosuba's comedy. In every episode, you have these recurring jokes. Kazuma Sato is being a pervert or exaggeratingly tries to prove a point, swinging his body like he's a Power Ranger on LSD. Darkness is being a masochist. Aqua goes accompanied with that annoying French accordion music in the background, and the rest of the cast is either derping around or are blatantly foreshadowing that they will be a boss encounter somewhere down the line. Every 5 episodes, our group fights the aforementioned boss that is always some sort of extravagant demon lord. Depending on his design, he will either survive their encounter or will be dead and no one will ever remember him. Hell, they even reused twice the same gag with running animals. Oh, and of course, a dick joke, so that when I will say that Tom and Jerry's humor was more sophisticated, people can say, well, this is an adult humor, your feeble mind wouldn't understand that. But even though the show makes Mr. Bean look like Life of Brian, the show's main strength lies not in its humor, but in its main heroes. Though in the first season most of them could easily be described as various levels of chuny, the second season is where the characters literally start to brim with personality and life. Kazuma turned from a shitty isekai protagonist parody into not only a relatively competent and likable protagonist, but also into a person that, albeit begrudgingly, is respected and genuinely loved by his female companions, even if they will probably never admit it to themselves, let alone to him. Aqua, while still a bitch, shows that she's not that malignant and lazy, but rather just has a childish view on things and just wants to be liked by all, even though most of group's troubles happen either directly because of her or her actions. But this strength is also the show's main weakness that many people will probably won't notice right off the bat. The more the show goes on, the less funny and memorable it becomes. The main shtick of Konosuba is that these characters are incompetent, and even in the second season this is more or less not a thing anymore. Kazuma is perfectly capable of herding his harem into a coherent unit that can easily go toe-to-toe with even the strongest bosses. And without the comedy aspect, this is simply trapped in another world fantasy anime, but without any epic stuff that makes these shows so pleasant to watch. And believe me, it won't be long till the viewer will be tired from the recurring jokes and just dumps the show entirely. Overall, this show is not as bad as the first season, yes, but at the same time overly mediocre and kinda losing its touch. The only redeeming thing about it is that the other comedy shows of this season are apparently even worse. I sincerely hope that there will be no continuation of this show, at the very least not in this year, because mark my words, the longer it will drag, the worse it will get. It's kinda like space tourism, only more probable. So me watching anime goes something like this. I wake up in like 3 AM and do the procedure nonsense, when suddenly one of my employers barges in and tells me the next thing I review. Then I kindly say something like, "Sir, I kindly request that you leave my designated area of habitat before I'll do something we all will regret." Wait, what the fuck do you want me to watch? And he tells me some small trivia about the anime. And that's literally all the prep I do before diving into it. I'm telling you this because the answer I had for Kimono Friends was most amusing. It's some kids shit that for some reason got very popular in Japan, the fucking rice-eating freaks. And if there's anything that makes me really interested in something, it's when someone starts calling it in very derogatory slang terms. Before we start, a bit of a warning. Spoiler alert, best you close this video and hide under your bed if you want to go in without knowing everything, cause I will spoil the ever-living fuck out of this show. And now, let us begin. I haven't read any of the descriptions on the internet, but if it goes something like, "A little girl got lost in a giant zoo with animal girls," then know this. This is all a bunch of malarkey, and people who write this shit are unwittingly contributing to the prejudice apparently many Westerners have towards this anime. The real story here is that there's this big island nature reserve called Jaffery Park, where animal girls run free, eat Jaffery buns, and generally are all cute and adorable like any standard Japanese anthropomorphous thing, and suddenly out of nowhere, there's this random girl appears in the middle of the savannah, and not only she has a massive case of amnesia, but also she doesn't even know what species she is. And in case if you're blind or doing something else while listening to this recording, obviously she is a human. The only human on the island, in fact. And you don't have to be a genius to deduce that humans are probably either dead or left the island due to constant attacks of local sentient blobs of goo. The show doesn't exactly tell you what happened to them, but gives enough clues that anyone with a working brain could probably guess. That, or I'm just too familiar with this shit to notice it right away, I don't know. And so, our little girl named Bag and a friend, that's how the animal girls are called here, Serval, venture in the Jafari Park to find out what kind of animal she is and be cute and adorable. Cute and adorable is overall the theme of this show, along with the post-apocalyptic tones whenever anything human-made comes into the play. And you know, seeing this, I can now fully understand why it is so popular in Japan. To give you a gaming analog, not so long ago there was an interesting game called Tokyo Jungle made by Japanese. The game was about various animals trying to survive in a post-apocalyptic overgrown Tokyo, and it actually had not only entertaining gameplay, but also was pretty accurate in its animal description and the way it incorporated their differences in the game. This anime is pretty much the same. Every depicted animal girl has not only the looks, but also acts like her respectable animal counterpart, albeit in a childish manner. Although, what exactly were you expecting, as not only this is a standard cliché for an animal girl in Japan, but also there's no one to educate them on the island. I would be more surprised if they didn't act childish. The second strongest point of this anime is the music. Not overly bombastic with only 3-4 recurring tracks, but each unique and distinctive enough so that the viewer can differ a cute scene from, well, shit's gone bleak real fucking fast, which is already better than Konosuba, whose music was either forgettable or made me want to break my TV screen. If there is something I would call a flaw in this anime for the general consumer, besides the fact that its graphics are only 0.5% better than those of the new Berserk, it's that even though I highly praise this anime, for many people it would appear as overly childish and therefore not worthy of their attention. I'm not going to argue that some episodes are overdoing it with the cuteness factor, and the educational trivia in the intersections of the show are usually cut very abruptly, especially if they're made by foreigners. Hell, I'm sure that some of the people watching me won't like this show simply because effectively it's not doing anything new in particular, and I won't blame them. But those who decide to stick to the entirety of it probably won't be disappointed for one simple reason. You see, in Americas and Europe, people usually use post-apocalypse as either a generic blanket and a way to create tension for the characters, or as effectively a story about a brave man trying to survive in a world full of degenerate barbarians. In ex-USSR states, post-apocalypse is usually depicted as something that either already happened or is happening and you just have to deal with it. The surrounding world is a character in itself. And in Asian countries, mostly Japan, Korea and Malaysia, post-apocalypse is usually depicted as something that happened either so long ago that nobody remembers or gives a shit anymore, or is effectively in the background but never fading into obscurity. The characters just use relics of the past and simply live. And this is one of the few things Japan is actually better than most other countries, and such stories generally come not only better, but also publicly acclaimed. There's still a bunch of island races though. The most popular thing on the market that will create an ungodly amount of porn? Check. The most popular thing in Japan? Check. Now we go to the most popular anime for angsty teenagers. You know what I'm talking about. Another one of those anime with too much gore, special effects, epic music, and possibly Satan, so that teenagers and young adults would sit in their comfortable rooms masturbating on whatever counts as moe this season instead of doing something useful with their lives. Previous season it was Drifters. This season it's Yojo Senki, or Saga of people who know about foreign namings only from Wikipedia articles. And before I even start, I will say this. Whatever you think of this anime, they sure know how to advertise their product, I'll give them that. So our story begins with a typical Japanese middle-class white-collar doing what every typical middle-class white-collar people like to do all over the world. Autofillate himself and his way of life, saying how fucking awesome he is and how fucking effective he is and la la la, to put it shortly. In an event of a communist or religious takeover, people like these tend to die first. And after a perfect demonstration why these people tend to die first, our hero encounters God, whose name I won't pronounce because I'm not fucking stupid, and after our hero effectively talks shit, God reasonably gets pissed at him, and as God usually does, he invents a particularly inventive punishment. Our white collar gets reincarnated in a parallel dimension Russo Germania as a little girl a few years before World War I. And since our white collar can't take the hint, he goes on an atheistic crusade to both become something big in this world and stick it into God's ugly mug. So in other words, I can very much relate to this character. As the show progresses, our little Tanya von Degrachow becomes more and more powerful both politically and militarily, thanks to God literally forcing her to become a paladin or die, and the First World War slowly turns into Second World War, with God creating more and more obstacles on her way, including blessing other people with his divine powers and wisdom. People really like this sort of shit, do they? Well, as much as I would like to piddle all over this anime like a chimpanzee with a urinary conscience, I honestly struggle to come up with anything worthwhile to say about this anime. It's not that I didn't like it. The music and the graphics are pretty decent, with both opening and ending sounding alive and motivating, just like they should. And while some people might dislike the fact that almost every soldier and military piece is made in a painfully average CG and women faces tend to look like Matryoshka dolls, it never really bothered me. The world here is also pretty good, at least in the beginning. The battle mages don't look outlandish compared to the regular troops, their tactics are more or less believable, if a bit standard fighty shooty pow-pow-ish. The battles overall show the usual horrors of the First World War. Trenches, charges, machine guns, and the military itself acts with a mixture of noble beliefs and blind retardation, you know the drill. Unfortunately, the more show progresses and your characters tamper with it, the less believable the world becomes and turns into a mildly annoying civilization game where knights suddenly turn into tanks. The characters here, while all have a name and introduction signifying their importance, are ultimately boring and forgettable, with the exception of our main protagonist and possibly her Russian pet, or as I like to call her, that shell-shocked girl with a blank and slightly confused expression on her face. This, in combination with the fact that the action slowly devolved into a pretty one-sided fight, made me care less and less about the characters. And this is kinda the feeling I had when the show finally finished. The more bombastic the show became, the less I was paying attention to it and kinda dozed off. There is a particular cliché one can sometimes see in Trapped in Another World works. A character who in previous life was either overly ruthless or was in the military is getting trapped in the body of a person of ye old, and using the almighty powers of modern humans, he radically changes the social and even the technological level of this world, resulting in a wish-fulfilling power fantasy and a very boring story. The reasoning for this is very simple. Eventually, you realize that the main character and his friends won't die, even if all odds are against them. No matter how much our character tampers with reality, no matter what obstacles he will face, you know that he won't fail because he's effectively too smart to fail. The same goes for his sidekicks, and if you know the outcome, why should you care? Besides Tanya, none of the characters or what was happening on the screen have managed to impress me, and even then, the only reason why I remembered Tanya was because character-wise, she and I think similarly. And that's not enough for me to recommend this anime to people. Yojo Senki is like Transformers, a pretty show that many viewers will probably like because of explosions, death, and the protagonist, but just like Transformers, it is nothing more than something to mindlessly watch and forget about until the next part comes. And to those people that say shit like, I would do the same in her situation, or wow, she's so evil, it's hella cool, I will remind you that there is a lot of places where you can be just like her, yet for some reason I don't see a big line of people to actually be true to their words. I wonder why. Japanese really love their animal and mythology girls. There's like, what, 3-4 anime about demi-humans, if not more, this season? Well, not that I'm overly surprised. Humans have this weird fascination with creatures that look like a blend of themselves and animals since time immemorial. A fascination that I can't for the life of me understand, mostly because back in my times we used to hunt these creatures akin to pest control, yelling something like, MOTHERFUCK! in whatever language my employers use. Those were fun days. But I digress. Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid is one of the 2 anime of this season that my employers described as Konosuba wannabes, and considering that watching old people playing chess is more enjoyable than Konosuba, I dreaded the worst when I started watching it. and was pleasantly surprised. The story here is as simple as it gets. A typical office programmer with a severe case of maid fetish named Kobayashi, and yes, this is a girl, in a drunk stupor finds a dragon, and after somehow saving it, this dragon named Toru falls in love with her and decides to be Kobayashi's maid, hence the name and the entire premise of the show. As the show progresses, the cast of dragons becomes bigger and we get to see how these foreign immigrants adapt in a typical modern Japan. As I said, simple enough. The strongest point of this anime is its characters that are generally easy to identify both by their looks and their personalities. The protagonist is especially good, as unlike most protagonists in similar stories, she doesn't act like a whiny little cunt, and in fact she's one of the most believably written characters in this season so far, as not only she acts like an actual programmer, but she's also ultimately a reliant parent figure not only for the dragons, but also her co-workers in the firm. The dragons are also decently written, as not only the show subtly or directly explains their every single quirk, but the dragons also act accordingly to their popular mythological description and sometimes get ridiculed by others for that, although considering the author's pedigree it shouldn't be this surprising, honestly. Music and graphics are for the most part okay, but nothing worth noting or mentioning, with a decent opening that I found myself skipping less than that of Yojo Senki, and even humming along, especially when I'm sleepy, and no fucking CGI, at least at a glance, and that's already a plus from me, god damn it. However, this anime suffers from the same problem that Konosuba 2 suffers, and that the jokes, while funnier than those from Konosuba, sooner or later begin to repeat, and the viewer will grow tired of them, especially if he binge-watches it. Besides Kobayashi, the rest of the human cast, while also decently written, quickly turn into a walking gag that grows old very fast, especially when the joke can be summed up in one picture. This is especially obvious in the later parts of the show, like for example the little match girl episode that I deliberately skipped large parts of, and not only have gotten the overall moral, but also accurately predicted how it actually went. This is effectively the curse of such shows. If they are bad, they will be accused in pandering, but if they are good, then they will be quickly glossed over because, well, what else can you say about them? The biggest problem this monster girl genre has, at least at time of this recording, is that it is primarily designed with a certain demographic in mind, and that demographic usually thinks with whatever it is in their loin area, if things at all. As a result, most of the titles that are coming today are received at best with a resigned indifference, at worst with active hostility. And not that this position is unjustified, as most of these works do not incorporate any of the major cultural and physiological differences these monster girls will have compared to your average Japanese person, making them follow rules of a certain archetype instead, and as a result making them look seemingly shallow. You can show as many Sues as you like, that doesn't change the fact that in her place there could be a girl with Down syndrome and nothing would change significantly. The same thing you can say about, well, any one of the girls in question. What I personally liked in the Dragon Maid is that the dragons there, even in their human forms, act not only believable, not hiding the fact that should they wish so they could decimate the city in a blink of an eye, they also act like foreigners with their own view on things dictated by their past experiences, age, or worldview in general, while at the same time not acting foreign enough that they look outlandish to people. Is Dragon Maid any good? Is Dragon Maid better than Konosuba 2? Entirely up to you to decide, but I'll say this. Comparing it to Konosuba is foolish at best, as the only thing they have in common is their fantasy themes, and even then Konosuba is more action-orientated than Dragon Maid. If you want to see something light, fuzzy, and down-to-earth, then I suggest you watch Dragon Maid. If you want to see something light, but at the same time more slapstick and action-y, then Konosuba is the better choice. Personally, I liked Dragon Maid more, because at the very least I didn't want to neither kill or kick any of the characters, and that means only one thing. That some fuckhead ate Rasolnik somewhere in this facility, and when I'll find that son of a bitch, that Russian soup will go so far up his anus that... Well, holy shit, I am a fucking prophet. Last week we talked about the importance of accurate representation, now we get to talk why accurate representation has its downsides. Strap on in, folks. I get the feeling that this will get nasty really fast. Demi-chan is an anime about a biology teacher whose name I can't remember that lives in a world where thanks to random genetic mutations, humanoid monster girls are a thing, and not until recently, these poor monster girls have gotten the obvious treatment. But now, as we live in a progressive society, they stopped lynching them, and now they slowly blend into everyday life. The aforementioned monster girls, or demis as they are casually called, are as followed. A highly energetic vampire girl that might as well be our show's protagonist, a Dullahan from some province so far that it might as well be be a foreign country, a snow woman who somehow managed to be irrelevant while getting the most screen time dedicated to her, and a succubus, or as I like to call her. How the hell can we insert fan service in this serious anime? There are several secondary characters, but they are either so banal or irrelevant to the overall story that I view even mere mentioning of them as an insult to my audience intelligence. Now, to be fair, I liked how the show seriously represented all possible problems these monster girls might have in your typical Japanese big city and your typical Japanese high school, even though mutations of said monster girls are more akin to disabilities than superpowers. It had almost zero blatant fan service, although a lot of just fuck already moments that sometimes made me feel like I'm playing some average visual novel and instinctively was ready to choose my route. The music, although an unremarkable mix of piano and violin, was hitting every string required and was used sparely. So why can't I recommend the show, you might ask? The answer is, well, both easy and simultaneously hard. I'll explain as best as I can. You see, I have this somewhat silly belief that legacy is very important, and every product must have at least some impact on its audience, from the graphics of this movie were breathtaking to this bounty bars sweet and delicious. No matter how terrible or bland the product might be, every person has to feel some kind of emotion that will then define the product in his eyes. If the person liked what he experienced, he will become more interested in what you offer, and though he might disagree with you on something, he at least will form your core audience, so to say. The problem with this approach is that people's opinion on things often form from 1,000 various things, from small to big, from a headache and a growing depression to a good old blowjob and a pretty check. However, even if what you like and dislike depends almost entirely on your mood and general view on things, we can see trends that the majority like via sales numbers and Occam's razor. This is the reason why there's a lot of action flicks and shooters right now that look similar, if not downright identical to each other, and not enough melodramas and strategy games. And the reason why I'm explaining all of this is that when I was watching Demi-chan, I felt nothing. The characters never made me laugh or annoyed me like in Kemono Friends and Yojo Senki. I can retell you what happened in 5th episode of Umaru, ReZero, and even Grimgar, but I can't remember what happened in 6th episode of this show, even though I finished watching it like, 4 hours ago? And while thinking why, I've come to a conclusion that the reason for this is that there was nothing here that genuinely hooked me. For all intents and purposes, I was watching a 12 episode documentary about why are not as bad as some people say they are and what sort of everyday problems they face, with moralization levels ranging from predictably righteous to fucking embarrassing. The only thing that I took from this story, even with all that I liked about it, was, well, good for you, I suppose. And I do not say that you shouldn't watch it. Maybe you're one of these demi-humans that finally wants to see himself represented and not bullied at least somewhere. Maybe you just want to see something not overly sexualized, and hell, maybe what I consider to be moralizing you'll find appealing. That is entirely normal, and I wouldn't hold a grudge against you. But the fact that this show was low on sales and probably has a small number of dedicated fans says a lot more about what majority thinks of your tastes than I or anybody else can ever say. But so that we wouldn't end this episode on a sour note, I have another fact that might, persuade you to watch it. This show has a rape horse in it, and a show that has a rape horse is a good show. Occasionally. You know, all things considered, this year genuinely started good. Most of the shit we've gotten this winter and spring was either good or at worst a resounding meh, which is already better than the previous season in 2016 in general. The downside of this, however, is that there's a lot of shit that I'm kinda interested in, and there probably won't be enough time for anything of that sort in between seasons. But considering that spring 2017 so far offered nothing that specifically caught my attention, maybe the entirety of autumn will be nothing but me rambling about historical and pseudo-historical whatever. Oh, and speaking about pseudo-historical, Akka 13 is an anime about a fictional kingdom of Dowa, a peaceful country that is best described as what would happen if we took Nazi Germany, USA, and USSR, blend them all together and added a bit of Japan into it, situated on either the most biologically diverse island in the world, or a continent that looks like a bastard child of Twitter and a peace dove, and the internal workings of the aforementioned Akka 13, a civilian organization that on paper regulates all agencies within the kingdom kingdom's 13 regions, but in reality it, for all intents and purposes, is ruling the entire country like the big socialistic blob that it is. Excluding the subplots, there are three main heroes in this story. Gene Otis, the second in command of the Akka Inspection Agency, aka basically Special Police, Lotte Otis, his sister whose personality constantly jumps from reasonably smart to levels of naivety only Princess Peach can topple, and his friend Nino who... well... I mean, if that's not a man who just screams, "I am a plot twist," then I don't know what is. Since I've mentioned subplots, it would be worthwhile to say at least something about them. Don't worry, no spoilers. Detailed, at least. Basically, all of them can be described as diplomacy at its finest, and one of many reasons why I try my best to avoid political discussions like the fucking plague. The graphics here are overall quite good, although they reminded me of One Piece for some reason. The opening theme and visuals are actually entertaining and do their job quite well, although the ending was slightly less lively and sounded more like your average, sad Japanese pop song. The rest of the soundtrack was more generic than a potato and monotonous, but as you've probably guessed already, that's essentially 92% of every movie, video game, and anime made after 1942. But sarcasm and Nazi jokes aside, this anime is actually not that bad, all things considered. It gives exactly what it offers, with the right amount of action, politics, and cake eating, while never derailing too much or going into unnecessary shit. It doesn't have your average lowly savants, and the cultural diversity that these regions offer is something you don't actually see in a lot of anime, even if, barring a few episodes, the show never lingers on them too much that an average viewer can memorize them. So where did they fuck it all up? Well, for an average viewer, it would probably be pacing, characters, and the plot itself. While the story was told very competently and the plot thickens with every new episode, the show relies too heavily on lore dumps so massive that they might as well be a rehearsal of some history books. And while this information is vital in understanding what the hell is even happening on the screen, a lot of people will find such way of storytelling to be tedious or boring, and not that I could blame them for that. The characters almost universally have only three types of faces: a poker face, a I hate everything face, and a smug grin that also might annoy people. But what actually annoyed me is the Japanese voice acting. Not only 90% of the lines were delivered in a monotonous fashion, but also for the first time in my life I could actually hear when a male had a distinctive female voice, which is, while not the biggest sin in the world, was definitely irritating. And finally, the plot is what today is considered to be the biggest sin of them all: predictable. 19th century literature predictable, in fact, and that is why I can guarantee that many critics will probably bash the title harshly. As for me, even though I acknowledge that I guessed everything besides the actual ending, I never had any problems with it. You see, critical snobism is a common disease among those who call themselves critics, in many ways because reviewing products is their job. But it won't take long until the critic will grow tired of what he's doing, starts generalizing, and try to find himself something new while bashing everything that is in any way conformist. The reason why I do not call myself a critic is because I, at least in this incarnation, believe that every product deserves to be treated as an individual product, and would rather watch something predictable but decently made than something avant-garde that offers me nothing besides a pretty picture and a lot of overthinking. So yes, I am literally Hitler. Our world is full of mysteries and strangeness that you humans often bravely try to tackle, only to realize that you can't kill a without using blue lasers. Some of these questions are best to just leave as they are in order to not become further disappointed in humanity, and some of them will simply never be answered. One of these hard questions about human society is, why in Thatcher's ovaries does this anime has this many episodes? I generally try to avoid these sorts of anime because they are a very slippery slope and might in the future force me to review shit like Dragon Ball Super or Gundam series or any other show that requires a fucking wiki just to summarize the plot. And if you're thinking, then why are you rambling about Twin Star Exorcist all of a sudden? The answer is the same as for all the dumb shit that happens in these recordings. My employers do not know when to shut up and fall for females, especially if they're Ukrainian voice actors. Twin Star Exorcist is a 50-episode anime about things that Japanese and old teenagers are really into these days. Teen soldiers and their eternal war against evil shit that really wants to kill people. The show follows the misadventures of Rokuro and Mado and Benio Adashino, the twin-star exorcists whose ultimate job is to fuck like rabbits and create the Ubermensch that will cleanse the world of all evil. And yes, there are evil monsters that suck the souls out of humans, and they live in a special dimension that was created specifically for them by them, and exorcists hunt them. And there are humanoid monsters that are intelligent and not all evil. It's a shonen, alright? These types of works are usually published by a specialized magazine that has strict requirements about every little detail, hence why most of them have plots so boring and repetitive that sometimes you can practically see where it was probably copy-pasted. My guess is that this one was published by Jump. These sorts of shows usually rely on stunning designs, action sequences, and world building that I like to call shonen style, just to piss off some fanboys out there. In right hands you can make wonders with it, but that would require too much work to separate all the good bits from diarrhea. And unfortunately, after watching 50 goddamn episodes in 3 days, I have to conclude that even in those aspects, this anime is blatantly subpar and sometimes is downright offensive. The action sequences and villains are so blatant power creeps that they put Bleach and Fairy Tail villains to shame. The world building is not only boring, but also makes no sense the moment you start to think about it for more than 2 seconds. And the main villain's plot is a eugenics experiment so convoluted that Mangale works would appear to you as rational and easy to understand in comparison. The only good things I can say about this anime is that the costume design is pretty, the visual direction was on point, and the battle music was awesome, but that's not enough for me to recommend this anime, as there are a ton of shonens out there that have everything mentioned without its flaws. And just to torture you all, here's a small show from me. So after Twin Star Exorcists basically had given me a migraine, what better way it is to begin the ending countdown of our prolonged and excruciating line of winter anime than by rambling about another anime about exorcists. Okay, now you're just fucking with me. If some of you people say, hey, I recognize this title from somewhere, then first, get the fuck out of my room. And second, yes, Blue Exorcist is a 25-episode anime that originally aired in 2011, back when 25-episode format was the norm. It was about a literal son of Satan named Rei Nakamura becoming an exorcist because of daddy issues, and you know that all demons murder people and Satan literally can't help himself but to burn everything he sees in blue flames shenanigans. It was an average, but overall not a bad show of a dying era where such types of shows were the norm and a guaranteed way to gather a stable number of followers. And now, 6 years later, we have a 12-episode continuation of the show, signifying that the anime industry is either getting really overworked or really fucking desperate. Named Blue Exorcist Kyoto Saga, the sequel starts where we left off with, spoilers probably, Rin Okumura essentially going Super Saiyan and scaring the ever-living shit out of everyone, and at the same time going to Kyoto to counter some vaguely described evil plot made by this dude, whose name you'll probably never remember. Since like many other similar shows, this one is a direct continuation of the previous season, it expects that you know the characters straight off the bat, which is a bit naive if you ask me. Most modern people barely remember what they've done 2 weeks ago, and you're asking them to know who the fuck these people are, considering that personality-wise they're so bog standard that vanilla-flavored ice cream will look to you as the most vibrant shit you have ever tasted. Besides the usual boo-hoo, I'm a monster, other subplots are about the inner workings and conflicts of Kyoto's Vatican-affiliated Buddhist sect, as well as the inner demons of Rin's brother, Yukio Okumura, and also there's this cute vermilion bird. I mean, look at it. Adorable. The graphics of the show were faithful to the previous season and never looked cheap or hastily made. The music was for the most part serviceable, although unlike Twin Star Exorcists, it never had a track that particularly caught my attention. Character interactions were not all bad, even though sometimes there was these failed attempts to create tension, like when they tried to find out who the traitor was. This male, or this white-haired, golden-eyed, snake-tattooed female with a permanent death glare on her face. Well, gee, no one will ever guess who the traitor is. No one. Similar things popped all over the show, especially when Yukio was involved, but overall it was serviceable. The world building was actually pretty decent, all things considered, with actual visible differences in official Vatican and Kyoto's Buddhist ways of demon purging, along with the usual behind-the-scenes political nonsense that many people enjoy these days. So my final word is, if you liked the previous season or action anime in general, then you're probably gonna enjoy this, but don't expect anything of a particular merit or value out of it, like watching news these days. One of the more common rookie mistakes one can make when judging a piece of entertainment media is to declare it or its themes to be mature or adult, a term that for all intents and purposes has zero actual meaning and used more as a common denominator for everything that has nudity, open scenes of sex, foul language, or controversial viewpoints. My problem with that is that in most cases this doesn't mean jack, because adults and children have a lot more in common than most people think they do. For example, Invader Zim features a lot of rude language, disturbing images and humor that at best only young adults can understand fully. But does it mean that children won't watch it? No, because Zim is a funny character. Children are entertained by his actions and world building, and what they don't understand or find boring they just filter out. Angry Beavers features a lot of humor that nowadays is considered to be adult, with at least one character being a walking parody on truck drivers, and a lot of references are to stuff that even adults in their 50s will have trouble understanding. Does it mean that children won't watch it? Of course not. Norbert and Daggett's adventures differ every episode, have good voice actors, and most importantly, they're entertaining. The list, as you've probably guessed, goes on, but the point I want to make is very simple. Just because the show features something only adults or teens can understand, doesn't mean that children will automatically discard it and go watch Teletubbies. And at the same time, it must never be considered as a defense point for a show that is either just poorly made and has nothing besides their adult themes, or is a clear nostalgia bait or a propaganda piece targeted at a specific audience. And this is where we start talking about Onihei. Onihei is an anime adaptation of the Onihei Hankacho, a series of Japanese historical novels written by this dude that actually have a big following in Japan itself, but was practically never heard outside of it. It features a number of stories about a samurai policeman named Hasegawa Heizo, quite brutal but forgiving and merciful man in charge of the specialized department of theft, armed robbery, and arson. Most of the stories follow either him on the case or him reminiscent of the cases he was in, usually against organized bands of thieves that kill and maim people in the process of stealing. If it sounds somewhat familiar to you, then ding ding ding, my friends, only now it's in times of Tokugawa. And that's about it, really. The plot is effectively just a bunch of stories that for the most part never have anything in common with each other, save for our main hero and a number of recurring characters, some of which are so similar to each other that sometimes I couldn't even say who is who anymore, and that is not a good sign for a visual media. And if I was an amateur, I would now start to lengthily describe everything that this fucker ever done, saying some cliche shit like, "This moment is where the character grew on me. Or, I wasn't expecting how deep this show was, so adult and serious. Or, oh, the tension, go watch it immediately.
But unfortunately, my first and foremost task is to be as transparent in my judgment as possible. Yes, I liked the show. No, I can't recommend it to a wider audience. The biggest problem Onihei has as an anime is that from the start it was a niche product designed to cater to a specific audience, namely Japanese, fans of crime fiction like CSI, and people like me who like historical shit. I have a strong suspicion that outside of some illegal anime sites, this thing was never aired in the West, and for a good reason. The majority of anime fandom nowadays are people in their teens, 14, 25 years old, who vaguely remember history of their own countries, let alone foreign ones. Most of them generally don't watch serious shit if they can avoid it, and not that I can't understand why. I lived a very long life, and throughout the entirety of it, it is the young ones that have gotten the worst end of whatever current century has to offer. They are the frontier of and to all sorts of shit you can possibly imagine, and from a perspective of a person who just wants to be entertained, Onihei is simply boring and unremarkable. The graphics are plain, the 3D they used is slightly better than that of Berserk, and the music, while pleasant, is one of those generic noir soundtracks that you'll remember how they started, but never the entirety of the song. Even the action in Onihei is, while not generic in the anime meaning of the term, generic in the sword fight meaning of 1/1 kill. As a film, Onihei would probably get a bigger audience and recognition. As an anime, it is simply bland and forgettable compared to its competition, and the only people I can recommend it have either already watched it or don't watch anime out of sheer principle. So in other words, just like Let's Players.
What a beautiful day it is. The concrete is grey, the cameras are small and watching me from every possible angle one can imagine, and a big bowl of kiwis is laying right next to me, probably for the voice actor to eat. And speaking of large, wet, green objects that are perfect for both eating and shoving up one's ass, what better way it is to start our spring season reviews than with sequels. This season was a real sequel-apalooza, so in order to deal with this as quickly as possible and go to the actually interesting stuff, let's begin with the obvious runt of the litter, Berserk. Directly following the previous season, Berserk tells us about Guts turning from a lone demon killer into a leader of a typical adventure party of every adventure shonen anime ever. The only problem is that most of the things happening in Berserk are obviously not very child-friendly, and so all of this looks like a deliberate attempt to make the obnoxious fanboys to finally shut up. The graphic quality gone from "Oh god, my eyes!" to "Oh, this looks pretty average" for "Oh god, my eyes!" Which is an improvement, in the same sense that an elephant turd is better for your digestive tract than a human one. If there was any original music in there, I couldn't hear it over all the "Hiya" and "Blood and guts and blood and guts." So there's that. The only thing that definitely caught my attention with this title is that most of the fans have usually only two complaints: that the graphics are shit and that they haven't made something that was in the manga, and not complaining about the fact that Berserk is about Guts and Griffith, and every other character in it, with the exception of the retard, is practically cannon fodder that serve only as a distraction from Guts killing everything that gets in his way. What a relief that everyone's standards are so much lower these days, otherwise people might actually do something about the things they disagree with. The usual category of long-ass shonens is represented with Attack on Titan 2 and Boku no Hero Academia, that I'll include here as well because I can't be bothered to actually wait till the show ends. Attack on Titans is basically what I've predicted in my review of the first season. A full-on Titan punk with a good chunk of it devoted to lesbians and their lesbianism and death of people you don't care about. The graphics are awesome and on point. The soundtrack is not only one of the best soundtracks I listened to in the last couple of months, but also, unlike certain other shonens, they don't rely on a single track and 7 billion remixes of it, and the main characters are still grimdark douchebags as they were. It's still the same dumb action flick as in the first season. I still think that this was fucking pointless, and for the average viewer, this season will basically be the final point of no return. If he liked this, he'll like the rest of the bullshit that will inevitably come. Boku no Hero, meanwhile, is the love letter to Western comic industry, made by either a very devoted fan of them, or most likely by a person who knows about them only from Wikipedia and whatever Japanese have for comic reviewers. The story here is that Max Eisenhardt's dream finally came true, and the world was finally cleansed from most of humans and replaced with superior homos, as it should. Our main hero, Izuku Midichlorian, is basically every underdog hero of every shonen ever created. Short, plucky, overly emotional, highly suicidal, gotten his powers from a literal demi-human. Add a ton of references to Western entertainment media at your discretion. If we compare B&H with AOT, then from a purely technical perspective, Attack on Tacos is far more superior, as the graphics are much more detailed and the music they used is varied, unlike like Boku's one track on its 1,000 different variations of, and what's very important for these types of shows, Titan's action scenes are not only visually pretty, but also easy to track, unlike battles in Hero that range from mediocre to what the hell is even happening. Where Boku no Pico is better than Titans, however, is in the storytelling and characters, the most important aspect of a shonen anime. While Titan's protagonist is the usual boring grim-face McGrim, the cast of Academia is much more entertaining to watch and has a more diverse set of characters to play with. Still, that doesn't change the fact that both of them are average at best and can only be used as fast food. And as for Boruto, you know, every time I hear something like corporations are governed by humans too, they always have a reason to do what they do, I genuinely laugh a bit. Of course they do. Do you think I'm this grumpy without any reasoning behind it? Only fools will believe otherwise. But that's probably far worse. You see, evil comes in many forms, and one of the easiest evils to deal with is the evil that is evil just for the sake of it. It does so because that's literally part of its nature, what it's best at, without any hard reasoning behind it. And such creatures usually have a strict set of regulations, a rudimentary honor code, if you will, that prevents them from doing evil efficiently, be it some inherent weakness or just a convoluted set of laws that it must maintain. The hardest evil to counter, however, is the evil that does not have this impenetrable set of laws that governs its actions, because without them, the only thing that they're left is their goal, and they will do it disregarding anything and anyone, no matter how good you think your protection is. The fact that sometimes it is a necessary evil only makes it easier for them to brainwash people into submission. The hardest evil to counter is the one that can negotiate. But I've bored you with this pointless dribble long enough. My point here is, I hope you can accept that they're gonna keep this thing and all the rest of them on life support until they milk everything they can out of it, and then they're gonna keep it even longer just to be sure. And unless you will gather up a vigilante group and slaughter every single shareholder on this planet, they will never stop, and there's nothing you or I can do to stop it. In other words, Trigger, aren't you a good boy? Not only you're one of the few studios whose works can be recognized simply by their style, but also even their failed works carry that carefree style of theirs, making it a lot more recognizable. Fanboyism? Maybe, maybe not. Doesn't change the fact that it's better than modern Gainax. Little Witch Academia is a 25-episode continuation of two independent OVAs that can be basically described as Disney but Japan, though now it's more of an idiot female Harry Potter in the world of magic. But it's of little difference if you ask me. The plot is as simple as it can get, but that's the charm of it. Atsuko Kagari, or Akko, a simple, a bit stupid and selfish girl of non-witch lineage, after watching a magic show made by Shiny Chariot, was inspired by her so much she enrolls at Luna Noa Magical Academy to become a witch and make people happy, but since she's a muggle, then things obviously don't go as expected. Enter the usual, you're a dunce with terrible grades but a very stubborn personality, and due to a lot of circumstances, she obtains Chariot's magic wand called Shiny Rod and, well, becomes the chosen one. See what I meant about it being Harry Potter? Instead of Ron, we have Lotte Jansson, a kind and soft-spoken Finnish girl that loves Twilight. Our Hermione is a mushroom fetishist and specialist in being a goth chick and brewing potions, and instead of Draco we get Diana Cavendish and Andrew What's-His-Face, whose roles are basically being nobles and not muggles! The whole anime is basically Akko doing Magic Academy stuff. Learns how to fly, how to cast spells, generally cause mischief, becomes a socialist, you know, the usual drill. You know, the usual drill is this anime in a nutshell, to be precise. If you have watched more than 3-4 cartoons, be they from the East or the West, you'll instantly recognize the familiarity in Little Witch Academia, as it is the Trigger anime in a nutshell. Here's your pretty but not constantly overly detailed graphics, giving it a bit of an old school anime look. Here's your epic trumpet noises and music that will get you pumped but won't make you actually remember it. Here's your epic space battle and a fulfilling happy end. Here's your simple plot that will keep the child inside you happy and make you wish for more. Oh, and yes, here's your references to practically everything the authors could think of at that particular day. So, as you've probably already guessed, I liked the anime, but at the same time I recognize the flaws that can definitely make you hate it. The graphics can sometimes be too simple and reminding you of the old days, which can be a bummer if you like the shiny new ones. The story progression can be very easily broken into components, most of which have no connection with each other, save for the later episodes. The world building itself is not only the usual science rule, witches drool, and magic is so old school, yo, but also makes little sense the moment you actually begin to think about it, and the same goes for the villain's plan in general. And of course, our main hero is a whiny, self-centered, egotistical cunt whose only job in the anime is being a nuisance to everyone and carry the big dildo of awesomeness that is Shiny Rod. If you're one of those people seeking mature and new experiences or serious stuff, then I suggest you skip this anime as it'll probably annoy you. Those, however, that simply want to be entertained or are into that classic Disney or early Harry Potter charm will enjoy this anime a lot. It's a big, soft, fuzzy kitten that will make you happy or make you allergic, but no matter of your reaction, it will occasionally shit under your bed. So this is where we are now. A 4-episode show is now considered to be a season. Don't get me wrong, if anything to me it is a good thing. I don't have to sit here watching 12 to 25 episodes all day and can go do something productive with my time instead, but I do wonder how was this made possible. Did they run out of budget? I can't say that I exactly know the modern prices for animators and whatnot, but unless they were paid in Ferraris and premium cocaine, I am more than sure they could do at least 10 episodes straight. Did producers or directors of their network thought that it won't sell and decided to play it safe? It's probably the most possible scenario, but after watching Castlevania, I highly doubted that this was the case. It's a show based off a very popular game franchise that even people that don't play video games know due to how many fucking people talked about it, featuring sexy vampires, gore, and rude language. Considering that things like Game of Thrones and Adult Swim exist, they knew that this will be a success. Alternatively, it could also be one of those purgatory projects whose screenplay was written in 1997 or something, or just the good old-fashioned company's way of saying they'll eat fucking anything, or a combination of every previous reason combined. Who knows? Who cares? Definitely not me. Castlevania is a Netflix exclusive made by 2 American studios and is, as I said previously, a cartoon adaptation of Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse and a bit of Symphony of the Night, essentially depicting on how Jaina Proudmoore, Arthas and Varian Wrynn met up and why they decided to kill Dracula of all people. The story is practically the prelude to the real deal here, nothing to particularly write home about. Church is a bitch, people are bitches, Dracula is a very big bitch himself, and demons are eating female entrails. You know, the usual. The graphics are well made and decently animated, though the character animation was sometimes a bit wonky, but overall nothing special. My employers gushed over it like it's the next big step for Western animation, meanwhile I was sitting and counting the times it reminded me of Dark Fury and those Dead Space cartoons. The music, as usual with these titles, is practically non-existent, though to be fair to the show, there was no actual point in using the entirety of Castlevania's soundtrack there, and for what it was, aka a preview, the music served its purpose well. In its current state, Castlevania is a decent start of a show, and it's certainly not the worst way to kill your human hours, but if you're one of those people who prefer entertainment that is actually finished, shocking I know, then I suggest you keep this thing on your radar until the inevitable second season comes, or alternatively, go watch Hellsing or Vampire Hunter D. It's all the same shit anyway. Every person on this planet has some sort of guilty pleasure, be it a stupid movie or a particularly bad game that he likes. One of the most common guilty pleasures an anime fan has is watching ecchi anime, or as people usually call it, softcore porn. Though calling it like that in this day and age is a bit of an overstatement if you ask me. If I want to see some boobs and genitalia, all I have to do is go watch some pride parade or a political event. Thankfully, there's always profit to be made from perverts. And so Japan has a wide range of shit to sell for anyone, no matter of their fetish or intact sanity. Sin 7 Mortal Sins, no not that one, is a 12-episode anime about Japanese butchering Christian myth and legends to suit their ill-gotten needs. I know that Christianity is somewhat of an exotic thing there, but it always annoyed me because although I say Christianity, the fact is it's nothing more than a generic skin they use in order to have a very pious zealot, a cool-looking hunter type, or a bunch of angry religious women to molest. But I digress. So our plot is surprisingly simple and also substitutes for a good drinking game. An angel named Lucifer was cast down from heaven for the great sin of having her own opinion, and after giving some of her blood to a, nun named Maria Totsuka, and yes, she's a virgin, she enters hell, and after a bit of molestation, she battles demons that represent the aforementioned 7 mortal sins: Belial, Satan, Belphegor, Mammon, Beelzebub, and Asmodeus, and after getting getting her ass kicked by them, she retreats back to the human world and starts taking down these sins one by one with the help of Eternally Cock-Blocked and Maria, who's used as a GPS navigator that runs on rape. Most of the episodes can be practically described in the following fashion. Lucifer goes to confront the sin of the day, then she retreats, then Maria gets molested by something and Lucifer overwhelms her opponent on her field. If for some reason Maria doesn't get molested, then she's acting like the typical female protagonist of a romantic novel, that is, making lives of everyone around her difficult because of her shitty decisions and naivety that is occasionally just barely manages to not go into full-on mental retardation. Oh, and she's constantly getting kidnapped because of course she is. But auntie, you shiny old man, no one's here for the story anyway. How about the visuals, you might ask? Well, the graphics and the quality of the animation are not at all bad for these sorts of works, although the animation during the battle scenes usually blurred characters' facial features. The character design is painfully generic and practically tells everything you need to know about their personalities and even the voice actors, although in its defense, their quirks do make them more memorable than they really should be. The sound design is perhaps one of the better sound designs out there, as not only most of the music used is generally memorable, but also most scenes have a simple but fun song accompanying them, making it easier to root for the characters even more. However, where it's lacking is the softcore porn itself. Sure, most of the characters eventually get naked, and almost every episode has at least some shots that can be considered erotic, but the actual titillation stops somewhere at 4th, 5th episode, replacing it with stuff so typical even Dragon Maid was looter than this. It eventually picks up the pace in 11th episode, but as erotica, it is disappointing if you compare it to similar stuff on the market. The biggest problem with Sin, no not that one, is that it feels that the creators knew what they wanted from the anime they were making, but not entirely sure on how to actually depict it, and as a result, every episode felt somewhat separated from the rest of the show, be it by tone or by visuals alone. This could be explained easily, saying that the anime itself is but an advertisement to a bunch of erotic figurines, or by the fact that this was made by a studio that recently filed for bankruptcy and was working on it along with people that made this thing. True, but the fact that they had to put 2 recap episodes for a 12-episode anime is a clear sign that something went horribly wrong there, like a child whose parents are giraffes in denial. China! So fucking what? When USA makes an anime-like show, everyone calls it a rip-off. When French and Italians are establishing multimedia brands with a certain stylistic, barely anyone registers it. But when China does it, it's somehow more special. It's like the Dream Daddy game everyone's talking about. Its theme is literally the only thing that differentiates it from thousands upon thousands of similar projects, yet people are pissing their pants about it like they've never heard of visual novels before, both fans and haters. Well, thankfully, I am not so easily fooled, and the only difference between Chinese and Japanese cartoons to me is that one speaks watashi machine ashi gashi dashi gaijin and the other chun chan chin chun dun da la bai. The King's Avatar is a 12-episode donghua about Chinese pro-gaming scene and how McDonald's is the ultimate food and everyone should buy it, especially that green ice cream thing that looks like they clamped some seafood in it. The plot here is as follows. There's this game called Glory, a first-person action MMO that is most accurately can be described as a mix of Lineage 2 and a fighting game, so don't be too confused when they start to comment about APM and whatnot. In fact, if you're not a gamer, just get used to the fact that half of the rules and limitations will probably make little sense to you. Don't worry, they made little sense to me as well, and I fucking played MMOs in my days. Our main character, the grin of a serial rapist, also called Xu Ye, was the most popular and famous player in China with skills so massive he was practically untouchable, but unfortunately in sports your skills have the least value. And after getting kicked out of his team, he decides to do the most logical thing, create a new character on a newly opened server and troll the ever-living crap out of every person there with his mad skills, training a team of talented noobs in the process. And if you're thinking right now, so Sword Art Online then, I'm probably going to disappoint you, but no, this is not SAO or any of the trapped in a video game Japanese anime, this is a sports anime. It uses the same cliches and the same narrative structure as your Yuri's on Ice and that Berserk basketball anime, so be prepared for all these secondary characters to cramp your view space and generally serve as a future fanfiction fodder. The graphics are pretty standard for a conventional donghua, although some of the viewers used to Japanese animation probably won't like the fact that the characters' personalities are basically hard-coded into their expressions, and the fact that the transitions between 3D and 2D are so painfully obvious I even recognize the engine they've made those models in. The music is good, from the opening and the battle themes to the ending. However, the opening and the ending will only sound good to you if you never heard Chinese songs before, and the battle music, no matter how good it is, quickly becomes repetitive in almost every episode due to how much fighting it features. The fighting itself looks cool, but in the same manner Super Smash Bros. Looks cool. All style, no substance, flashing colors everywhere, and it all ends in the same way. And finally, the biggest bugbear of mine, the world building worldbuilding and the game itself. Clearly not the main theme of it all, but at least most others never made any fuss about it. Here, not only we have a game whose mechanics constantly jump from one genre to another, but also just look fairly impractical for what it tries to do. Why does the interface has these abilities when the game is clearly first-person action, as all the characters seem to do all the time is furiously hammering their respective directional buttons and swing their mouses in an epic way? Why does every single major guild in the server tries to kill our main hero even though not only they know that he's miles ahead of them all, but also clearly did nothing wrong by the game rules? Why does this character is all surprised when a girl avatar is talking in a male voice? Why do these characters say that Shuya shit talks them even though never once he mentioned someone's mom? Where did this bastard came from? For all their supposed interactions, never once Shuya even mentioned him before. And finally, why do all of these characters have such weird names like Steam Bun Invasion, Chasing Haze, Soft Mist, Total Darkness, etc.? Man, Chinese are some sad, humorless motherfuckers if that's how their gaming scene looks like. But yes, it is a Chinese game. If you expect any sort of creativity from their naming, then boy do I have some awesome Hollywood property I would like to sell to you. As a genre, fantasy and fiction is akin to candy. On paper, it provides you with infinite possibilities and opportunities, a chance to witness and experience multiple different and interesting tastes. In reality, though, it usually means that you eat the same shit in different flavors and wrappers, and then you get stomach aches and your teeth decay. And it's not like you can blame the candy makers. They're a business, you know. They have to make profits first and think about consumers second, which usually means that the small ones are constantly competing with each other, while the big companies have at best split the markets and at worst are cahoots. There's but one slight difference between candy and fanfiction writers, however, is that the latter are usually highly retarded and possibly homophobic. Okay, maybe they're not so different after all. The Grimoire of Zero is one of the numerous fantasy anime of this season. The major difference between it and them is that while most of them fall in the comedy route, Grimoire lingers to the Lotus territory, for better or worse. The setup is, sorcery exists in this world and the church really hates it. So hates it in fact that they decided to kill every witch in the world with the help of their own Templar order. Witches obviously don't like the fact that they're going to be killed for basically the sin of existing, and so they decide to resist and obviously get their asses handed to them by swords and spikes. You know, considering all the times you see this cliche in fiction, one has to wonder on whether the magic in this world is really lame or the author just couldn't be arsed to write something more original. So, 200 years after the Great Witch Genocide, suddenly magic appears in this world, and the Kingdom of Japanese take on medieval Europe number 25B struggles so much with it that it hires all sorts of shit to deal with them, even beast people that are the local take on mercenaries. One of these beastmen, Furry Guts, hunts witches for a living, and after a peculiar encounter, he teams up with the witch, and I'm bored already. Long story short, the plot is very predictable and unimaginative, similar to that Zeta anime. Even our main villain, who suspiciously looks like Severus Snape, is not only boring all things considered, but also, well, look at this face. This is the face of a guy that is just evil forever. The graphics are generally good while up close, but turn mediocre the moment they make a scenic shot or just a scene of two people talking with each other in a big room. This is especially noticeable in the last 3 episodes, where the budget was clearly ending and they had to wrap it up as quickly as possible. The music is obnoxiously annoying, especially in the first 2 episodes when you're bombarded by generic epic music that sounds like it came from some Indian Lord of the Rings knockoff, and characters' personality and motivations are all over the place. Basically, the only good written characters in the entire story are Furry Guts and Zero, the witch that hired him as a bodyguard. Others' motivations and backstory are jumping all over the place and just either overly predictable or so out of the blue that the only reasonable explanation for this was that the author really liked the character design and decided to continue using it. Continuity be damned. However, this is not the point of it all. Does the name Chaos Dragon ring a bell? Remember how it was this pretty cool setting that turned into a predictable but watchable anime that everybody forgot about 2-3 months later? Well, this is this season's Chaos Dragon. Anime like these are the closest thing this industry has for Pirates of the Caribbean or Star Wars. A medium/high budget fantasy popcorn flick whose sole purpose is to be consumed, shut out, and then be broken into components to use for your own fictional universe, thus beginning the cycle anew. It's like the circle of reincarnation, only with more obnoxious fanboys and cosplayers. Though most anime and manga these days look like they were made in some automated factory, some of them do have a unique feel to them. Usually it's because of the theme or the art style, rarely because of its world or characters, but occasionally we will see a very talented author who has a specific and distinctive way of writing. One of these people is the creator of Mirai Nikki, Sakae Esuno, whose works are easily recognizable among others. And today we will both finish an old commission and talk about his last big work, The Big Order. So drink with me whenever you hear something that's similar or identical to Mirai Nikki. Created by Studio assmad, this anime tells us a story about a guy named Eiji Hoshimiya. He's black-haired, big-eyed, a bit idealistic and overly emotional buffoon, and most people in class hate him. However, he has a terrible secret. He is responsible for fucking the world in ways which all the current superpowers can only dream of, killing nearly 90% of people on Earth or something among those lines, and because of this he's very dark, angry and emotional, and his life would be basically that and a bit of incest, but suddenly an angry, red-haired girl appears in his life that is hardcore, rude, angry, proficient in many weapons, and what's most important, immortal, so we can kill her over and over and over again without any sorts of repercussions. And after making her his slave, because that's what our main hero does, duh, he shortly after becomes the leader of 10 wacky characters with superpowers, and they all treat him like a little bitch. Also, there's some doomsday device involved in there, I don't know. After finishing watching it, I felt not only dirty, but also in a dire need of dunking myself in a bath full of vodka and then setting myself on fire. The style of the show was average, pretty similar to Mirai Nikki in this regard, and the music is the same as the characters. A mix of boring and a strong desire to fuck something. And now that I think about it, you know what this anime really reminds me of? A children's game of superheroes. The one that I have no doubt some of you people listening played when you were at school. That certainly follows the rules of one. Now we can live forever. Oh yeah? Well, now I can control water and drown you! Oh yeah? Well then I'll combine my powers with her and stupefy you! Oh yeah? Well now I summon a sword that can cut through dimensions and kill you immediately! Eat it! And meanwhile, you're sitting there watching all of this and strongly desire to introduce them to the magical powers of a bike chain. Big Order is a good example why gangsters should never play any sort of tabletop games. First they start playing mages in D&D, and the next minute they're robbing banks and killing people, all while claiming that they're lawful good because they're paladins. Out of all the genres out there, trash is perhaps the hardest to make any sort of coherent criticism of that doesn't end up in muttering the old beaten, "It's shit, what did you expect?" The reason for this is in the name of the genre. This is not some high abstract sort of art with multiple ways of understanding it, not a cookie cutter movie made for a specific subset of audience, not even a high budget terrible movie. It's simply trash. Its plot is absurd and over the top, its budget sometimes equals to what middle-class Europeans nowadays call pocket change, its music is free or terrible, and the acting skills here are so infamous people to this day use some phrases as fucking proverbs. The only criteria people can and should use while judging such movies is the factor of entertainment, aka did I had fun watching this piece of shit? If the answer is yes, then by all means this is a good trash movie. If it's not, well, this movie is clearly not for you. Today we'll talk about a trash movie that I actually liked. Orc Wars, or Dragonfire if you're from the States. Directed by Arrowstorm Entertainment in 2013, this movie tells us a story of John, an army veteran that lives alone in some bumblefuck hut, suffering from PTSD and all the other stuff soldiers do, you know the drill. But suddenly, a sexy elven princess comes from another world to him, running away from a tribe of orcs that want to, you know, sacrifice her to Satan or something, but no honest American can resist the magical lure of vagina. And so John, the elven princess, some random fucks, and a blind Native American kung fu monk must go to this world to stop the evil, and John becomes a wizard, which in this world means a person with guns and an infinite ammo cheat. As for why I like this movie, my reasoning are the action, the special effects, and the orcs themselves. For a low-budget movie like this, the orcs are actually not that bad looking. They have a bit of personality to them, and the reasoning why they hunt that poor elf is not only shown to us, but also is solved almost by them without the help of our heroes. One of the orcs even becomes a wizard himself. Look at this. Isn't this adorable? Overall, as trash goes, this is one of the good trash films out there if you ever need a cheap, stupid action flick to watch with beer, or after you drunk all the beer and now puking all over your neighbor's cat. And we continue scoring off some of our requests with a very peculiar choice, I must say. Zipang. The name alone is interesting enough if you have lived my age. It's been at least 2 centuries since I've heard people call Japan that name, and what's most interesting, I've heard of this anime and a bit about the manga. It made quite the uproar back in the day, only to fade into obscurity like many of the now finished works of early 2000s, and I doubt many people have heard about it. So, Let's begin. Z-Punk is a 26-episode, trapped in another time period anime about a 21st century Japanese self-defense missile destroyer named Mirai and her crew accidentally traveling through time in 1942 right before the Battle of Midway. The crew of the ship obviously had a brief what the fuck moment and then decided to try their damnedest as to not change history too much. Unfortunately, one of the crew members, Yosuke Kadamatsu, just can't keep his righteousness where it belongs and saves a drowning Imperial officer named Takumi Kusaka, and after a brief, clearly homosexual scene between them, he opens up the ship's library where a military officer of Imperial Japan learns everything about the future, including how things will progress in the war. Good planning there, executive officer. That's not gonna bite you in the ass in any way in the near foreseeable future. You know how various people on the internet like to say that, oh, anime has become for children with low attention spams, I wish there were more serious anime with competent stories and all the other stuff they like to spew about. Well, I'm glad to say that this is by far one of the most serious anime out there. So serious, in fact, that it flows less like an anime and more like some historical TV drama. It has great characters, a very organic story flow, and has almost none of the cliches that plague modern anime industry. No emotionally unstable teenagers, no girls with superpowered weapons, characters very rarely act irrational and generally behave like trained military personnel, not like a bunch of drama queens. And what's most importantly, as far as anime goes, it actually portrays Japan of that era pretty fairly, as far as Japanese portrayal of that time is possible by them. They don't address the way they butchered civilians in China, but hey, French think that they won the war entirely by themselves without anyone's help, so I guess everyone's a bit of a hypocrite when it comes to those times, eh? Add to this the fact that it uses a lot of prominent Japanese historical figures who were against this war and a general anti-war spirit of Mirai crew, and we have a pretty fair anime where both pro-war and anti-war is shown in more or less equal measure. However, this anime also has serious flaws in both technical department and plot, which should be addressed. First of all, the graphics of this 2002 anime are not only old visually, but also old in everything else. Same face is a reoccurring problem here, and not once or twice I had realized that the only thing differing our protagonist from a random Japanese soldier number 21 is his outfit. A lot of scenes and shots are reused, and this becomes especially noticeable in later episodes. Following this, while modern anime goes out of its way to portray every more or less important character as visually unique as possible, Z-Punk has only 3 types of characters visually. A normal Japanese dude, a guy with these strange eyes like his skin had devoured his eyeballs, and a guy with a 1,000-yard stare whose face could very much be stuff of nightmares give him a proper makeup. Music is also pretty much meh, similar to old One Piece in this regard, and the pacing of the story is very similar to Evangelion or old Japanese movies like Rashomon. There is a lot of seemingly unimportant pauses in the dialogue where characters just stare at you or each other for a minute, communicating either with simple gestures, if communicating at all. And finally, the plot could sometimes be too silly for such serious anime. For a group that doesn't want to change history in any way, they sure do like to meddle with it a lot and then theatrically yell stuff like "Americans are not our enemies" or "Everyone blood is red," and then proceed to butcher said Americans with modern weaponry who act pretty much with reckless abandon and a real desire to kill every single Jap in the world. By all means, Z-Punk is not a bad anime. It's certainly unique enough to give it a try. However, if you're not a fan of historical stuff, don't like the way old anime did things, or you're a person who hates that Japanese occasionally try to revive that pre-war jingoism of theirs, I suggest you skip it. Some people don't like historical stuff, some people don't like when I post their private sex photos on the internet. I know, weird. I had a terrible sense of dread from the prospect of Den no Coil. Maybe it was the way I looked it up on a mal, and every bloody review it sounded like these guys scored very high in philosophy classes, and that's never a good sign. When people start to overthink, it means that either it's very esoteric or all style, no substance, like the majority of art and feature-length anime these days. Sometimes I'm really grateful to the almighty gods of anime that nowadays there's not a lot of 26-episode shows. True that 12-episode format usually breaks whatever plot the original source had, as worker drones die from starvation in hundreds just to make one episode, but at the very least, if the anime is not to your tastes, you don't have to sit through it for 3-4 days to complete. Den no Coil is an original sci-fi work of Mitsuo Iso created in 2007. The plot of this show is as followed. In God knows what exactly year, someone clever created the Google Glass, and now everything uses the Google Glass, along with the alternative reality or cyberspace that covers the entire city, thus gamifying it. And since we're in a game, we follow a bunch of elementary school kids with these glasses essentially playing playing a massive MMO in real life. They go around the city, mining bitcoins and illegal Mexicans, run away from this antivirus that has the most retarded design I've ever saw for a program, and all the other shit kids do, only less imaginative. And there's also the blasted Silent Hill-esque wasteland that is Mexico, but that's too much information. To put it bluntly, I wasn't impressed with the plot. The first part is for all intents and purposes a slice of life about these kids' shenanigans, and the second part is a lame moral message of people relationships are hard, man, occasionally mixed with we don't understand what the fuck we are using. And what's most annoying to me is the sci-fi part of it, that throughout the majority of this anime might as well be magic with how it's explained or used, and although the anime does explain a lot of its quirks in the later episodes, the seeming lack of consistent logic within the universe not once made me believe that the author just creates random shit as we go, and as a result, for every answered question we'll get 2 or 3 more. The characters also aren't very pleasant. They're either utterly forgettable or annoying little brats who need a good dose of spanking. There are a few characters that are consistent and therefore pleasant, like Daichi and Isako, but they are a minority in a sea of mediocrity, and a lot of people seemingly tend to agree with me. The graphics of this show are actually pretty decent, which is not that surprising considering that Mitsuo Iso's main job is an animator. It reminded me in many ways of Studio Ghibli's works, the same easy for the eyes style. The music is pretty much non-existent, mostly piano tunes that fall into the filler music type. Good that it's there, but you'll definitely won't even notice that it's actually there unless deliberately listen for it. Well, I think that sums up all of my major nitpicks. I should clarify that altogether they probably won't be enough to turn off those of you looking for a pretty anime with a more or less decent plot. However, those people that like stuff like Gantz or Steins Gate will be a little disappointed by it because the sci-fi elements here are as well written as they are in Stephen King's novels, and the characters are an imaginative bunch of toddlers playing in imagination with their stupid magic glasses. Again though, it shouldn't be a deal breaker. I think the worst thing I can say about Den no Coil is that now that I have watched it, I will almost certainly never rewatch or think about it again. Not that it's bad, it's just went into my soul said, yep, it's not that terrible alright, and then promptly kicked it off the car. See, one of the major problems in writing sci-fi stories is that your world building has to be not only technical, but also logical, not only for the common people who probably don't even know how lighters work, but also to people that are well educated in the thing you're trying to use as a plot point. By itself, the thin line between reality and cyberspace was a nice idea. The usage of Tori was a nice idea. The whole culmination of the plot was well, it certainly made sense, I'll give it that. And the Mexicans were certainly a thing. But combined, this all creates an average anime that will generate a bit of a buzz and overthinking about it and then be promptly forgotten, like the majority of these days YouTube celebrities. One of the main differences between an experienced and an inexperienced anime fan is that the first usually can predict what the anime will be about merely from seeing the cover and the description. Marketing is good in this regard, it lacks the needed imagination to make it really unpredictable. This doesn't mean that the anime will be bad, of course, but when you already know what's gonna happen, no matter how vague your hunch is, it always spoils your fun, so to say. When they gave me this anime to watch, my employers were very and positively impressed with this anime. They said that it's really not like those other dating animes where your gullible protagonist hoards women like they're living in the Ottoman Empire, so I decided, why the heck not? Let's give it a go, see what's original in here. Yep. Gamers is a 12-episode anime light novel adaptation created by a studio that I never heard before. It tells a story about a boy named Keita Amano, whose personality can be described as wimpy but with big balls. Besides that, he's a gamer and he spends his time playing various games. He's then recruited by your bog-standard perfect girl with a deviant hobby, Karen Tendo, who runs a gamers club that more correctly should be named esports club because all of the people in there are what you can call hardcore gamers, but our protagonist is not a hardcore gamer, he's just a no-lifer. So he rejects the invitation, Karen develops a crush for him, then other people come and drama ensues. Well, I say drama, it's more like comedy drama made by a dog and a kid with a late case of sugar addiction. The entire point of the drama and comedy of the show can be explained in very simple words: misunderstandings, which results in what characters see as some life hypercube, but in reality it just makes them all orbit around Keita and make him look like a hero. If this was a hentai story, he would be fucking them by episode 6, and 12 episode was to be a giant bisexual orgy, not crap, we just remembered that we're an anime about gamers, quick, talk about why gaming sucks ass! Besides that, the jokes were predictable as all hell, but not at all terrible, and if you're into that sort of stuff, this could be a worthwhile thing to note. The graphics are decent enough, the style is average, but the way they use different styles of animation is endearing and easy for the eyes. The music is meh, the gaming aspect is good if you're a casual gamer, terrible if you're in any way hardcore, and also there's a lot of Arc System Works advertisement. Gamers is the closest closest Japan had come to Mexican melodramas. Here you have your Conchita and your Carmelita fighting over Juan, who is really not Juan, but a random janitor wearing his clothes, while Juan is a blood-sucking gay nigger from outer space. This is a perfect anime for women, and what constitutes as the normie anime geek stereotype these days, and if you're saying right now,
But I'm not like that. I'm a serious and independent woman who doesn't need this nonsense.
then don't worry, you're gonna be like that as well once the menopause kicks in. Continuing the theme of the previous rambling, the more experienced you get, the more chances for you to become jaded. You watch more and more anime and they increasingly become more and more the same. At the same time, you start to form certain habits and tastes. A new anime fan will generally watch any old shit as long as he likes it. A more older fan will have an aversion to a particular genre or genres, so much so that he'll refuse to see them, and as I said previously, when you're experienced enough, it becomes really easy to not only judge a book by its cover, but also be correct in regards of its actual contents. Kakagurui is a 12-episode anime about an academy for the rich and privileged bastards, where everyone is probably rich and most definitely privileged, but also this is an academy where everything revolves around gambling, millions of yen and personal property, and if you lose, you'll become a house pet, which is essentially a term for a debt slave. This is what I like to call the idiot Japanese plot, because in order for this to actually work, you have to be in Japan and an idiot, because if this academy was in any self-respecting American or European nation that doesn't suffer from ungodly amounts of nepotism and slave mentality, the first suicide or Columbine would put an end to this all really quickly. But I digress. Our main heroes are a boy named Ryota Suzui, whose sole job in the anime is to be a boy and occasionally yell something along the lines of impossible, and Yumeka Jabami, or how most people will actually remember her, Alucard from Helsing Dawn in a school uniform. Hell, she even has his trademarked hurry remark, which makes me think that the original source material isn't old, 2014, 2015 I guess. These two and the other assholes that are considered to be characters are playing traditional gambling games alterations of varying levels of stupidity and make lesbian innuendos to each other. Oh, and the Japanese government is corrupt. The end. As you've probably guessed already, the plot is retarded, most of the characters are unsympathetic if not downright sociopathic assholes, and most of the viewers are clearly here not for the plot but for the boobs, asses and possible lesbian pairings. The graphics are fairly average but made decently, although the close-ups for some reason reminded me of Prison School in a bad way, and the music is actually pretty in theme with the rest of the anime and quite lively, not sure if I would listen to it separately though. I should also point out that Jabami's voice actress had done a really good job with her character, but this shouldn't be surprising really, considering her pedigree. Kakagurui is another one of those light sports shonen animes, clearly designed with young adults in mind and maybe people interested in gambling. Nothing in this anime will surprise you, and depending on your tolerance to blatant fan service, it will either be a mediocre but a fun-to-watch anime, or a mediocre anime that you'll stop watching after 3-4 episodes. I should probably joke about Stephen Paddock or something, but honestly it's a bit pointless to trade a full house for a 2-pair. 2-3 more to go. You know, this anime started strong, but gradually kinda turned into a wet fart. Not that I'm surprised, it's generally how things are in anime, but still, when you have to watch new stuff every week, it gets really tiresome. Restaurant to Another World is a 12-episode anime series and the oh-so-favorite Japanese genre of food porn about a typical restaurant that every Saturday turns into a restaurant for various people living in the fantasy world of who cares, and judging by the way they pay for meals and overall clientele, this is probably the majority of this restaurant's income. Now is the part where I have to tell you about the main characters, but truth to be told, there are none. There's the unnamed chef who runs the joint, 2 of his maids, one of which is practically what constitutes for a god in this world, and a bunch of regular patrons, each having more or less equal screening time and lines of dialogue. At this point, I would say that the restaurant itself has the more rights to be called the main character than any of the people occupying it. Anyway, the entire point of the anime is people from another world, usually of privileged origin, act like culinary snobs, and in vivid details describe how various food tastes. That's all. I wish I was joking. And you know what the worst part of this all is? I actually found this anime to be not that bad. The whole fantasy world, as generic as it may be, is actually pretty detailed and has at least 2 or 3 genuinely good parts about it that I would not mind exploring more. The narrative structure and storytelling is very enjoyable and sometimes even funny. The way this world interacts with this restaurant does not only make sense, but also is genuinely clever in its details. Where it's shit though is everything else, mainly in the technical aspect. My first problem with it is the overall length. Every episode episode is 23 plus minutes long and contain two separate but structurally identical stories barely connected with each other for the most part that all end in a passage very good for a light novel but terrible in an animated picture. If this was a 5-10 minute short anime, this would not be an issue. However, in a standard format, the viewer will get annoyed or bored by the anime really fast. Then comes the music, which was either tonally inappropriate in case of the opening theme or just a monotonous drone of piano and violoncello, usually during the scenes where the patrons taste the food for the first time, which translating in anime length means that you'll get to hear it like 2-4 times during one episode. And finally, the graphics of the anime are fairly average, but there is a certain visible level of cheapness to it one can see in every few episodes that sometimes make the voice acting sound a bit off tone compared to what actually happens on the screen. Overall, as far as these sorts of feel-good anime go, it's not at all bad. People who want to see something light after a hard day of work might certainly enjoy it, though I would advise you not to binge watch it due to its repetitive nature. As for the rest of you lot, skip it and never come back. Incidentally, why do Japanese always feature curry with rice? It's fucking everywhere in anime these days, even in this restaurant. It's not even a very hard dish, for God's sake, it's just rice with filling. Anyone who can cook something harder than a sandwich can do that. I can do that, and if a possessed skullcap can do that, then that means that there's either something wrong with you or there's something wrong with me. All things considered, probably both. I liked it. Okay, if this ended right here, this would be silly. Made in Abyss, which for some reason I constantly want to spell as Abyss, is a 13-episode adventure drama about a little girl named Riko and her bodyguard/sex doll Rag venturing deep into the aforementioned abyss, the closest thing this world has to a moss-infected gaping anus for reasons one could interpret as either strong family bond, brainwashing, or rising Oedipus complex. You decide. The general style of the show is what one can call Kaiba-esque. Cute, slightly disproportionate little children doing cute little things like surviving until something happens or is implied that will make the viewer shocked, scared, disgusted, or cry like a little baby. Everything from the drawing style and animation to voice acting is implying this, and although I may sound demeaning, it actually works. The graphics and music work in tandem with each other, creating scenery that is not only pleasant to look at, making you forget the glaring cuts they had to take in the animation budget, but also this is probably the only soundtrack after ReZero and arguably Kimono Friends that I'm willing to listen to separately. The Japanese voice acting is awe-inspiring, with every character sounding accurately to how one would imagine the character to speak like, a trait that is very hard to nail and very few can make, especially in anime. The plot is nothing particularly noteworthy. It's your average, there's one location in the entire world that has all the cool shit, and our main characters are people working in that location or with that cool shit, and with the way the story is built, me telling you something other than Abyss is just a giant hole in the ground would spoil the story completely, as our main characters, for one reason or another, know about the place just as much as we do. But can I recommend this anime? That is an entirely different question. You see, though the anime is great in a lot of ways, it has issues, and these issues are unfortunately enough for me to say that you shouldn't watch it. The first and most important problem with the anime is its pacing. You have the first 3 episodes of blatant exposition where nothing happens for the most part, and the last 3 episodes that are not only a kick in the nutsack, but also end so abruptly that considering the number of episodes makes me think that they either ran out of budget or material to work with. This combined with the overall sluggishness of the story and the plot will make some people hate the show almost immediately, as even in the generally good episodes you will always have the feeling that they either ended abruptly or before they even started. Some might also find the overall grimness of the story to be unnecessary and contrasting with the visuals and immaturity, as the show cracks toilet and penis jokes wherever it can, all while people violently die all around them, and Riko herself was dying quite violently for like a solid half of the 10th episode. So to conclude this, although I enjoyed the series myself, I can't sincerely recommend this anime to people for a lot of reasons, but most importantly the ending, which is quite literally gangsta style. Watch it at your own risk, and don't come crying to me if you feel disappointed. After all, I am just a mask, not a proctologist. While other people like to discuss the ethicality of genociding Russians and whatnot, you know what people never talk about? Ethicality of discussing and criticizing author works. You know how much sweat, time, and love a person must put into his own unique thing, even if the result is not that great or worthwhile, only for some random asshole to come and say it's shit so that others may parrot his opinions without any reason to go and experience it themselves. Can you even imagine how it feels like for the author, you sick, twisted... no, sorry, you twisted freaks! What? It's really hard to keep pretending to be empathic sometimes. Princess Principal is an original, as far as I know anyway, 12-episode anime about a steampunk United Kingdom after Brexit, where filthy rich fucks who don't want to change and filthy peasant scum who want communism are separated from each other by a big wall. Our main protagonists are teenage girls, each having a heavy and sad past, who work for the communists in a series of tasks that will probably get them killed someday, thus embarking on an epic spy adventure with a lot of sad stuff for people who never saw a corpse in their lives. Remember how when I was rambling about Steam Boy, I lamented that a lot of steampunk works usually just romanticize Victorian England without any rhyme or reasoning, ignoring that USA of those times would have an entirely different set of moral codes and problems compared to old Blimey? Well, I'm pleased to say that in terms of retrofuturism, the authors of Princess Principal had certainly done their homework. From the overall artistic style and design to historical accuracy and homages to Herbert Wells, this is a steampunk setting that I can actually get behind. The storytelling, while never blew my mind or did something I wasn't expecting, was competent, and the characters were not only sympathetic but also were believable in that they actually lived in this world. The graphics are what I call mostly good, as details and animation clearly show how much effort they've put into this project, but an occasional desync in characters' lip movement and animation frames in certain scenes is not only visible, but can sometimes be very humorous. The music is competent and certainly is a thing that a lot of people will enjoy, though it's one of those soundtracks that people will like listening to, and some even download on their MP3s, but after a while they won't remember where it's from. Princess Principal is a good anime, and I most definitely don't regret watching it, but just like with 91 Days, Onihei, and all the other quote-unquote original anime, it fails to become actually memorable, as in I will rewatch it every 2 or so years. Combine this with the aesthetics and genre that many of you don't like, along with an all-female cast of main characters, because of course they will be female, and you have an anime that will go past a lot of people, and those who watched and enjoyed it will fanboy over it for a couple of weeks or so, and will move on to another hipster flavor of the month. Whether it is a good or a bad thing is entirely up to you to decide, but I will remember this anime just like I remember Transvad. You know, people seem to be very keen on pointing out that some animes for mature audience while others are not. It's usually because of, you know, gore, sex, nudity, or overly exaggerated violence towards other humans, but I never understood this pathological desire to separate things by maturity. It always rubs me the wrong way, mostly because most mature works are kinda shit. They're either as interesting as watching paint dry on a naked woman's body, or overly pretentious about their pretty basic message like life sucks, people are horrible, stealing is bad, etc. And it's not like I don't like them, I just find them to be not as good as people like to believe they are. Inuyashiki is a story created by the dude who wrote Guns, animated by Mappa, which is known for publishing some really pretentious crap along with Yuri on Ice, featuring this 56, I think, person who looks like he could pretty much be 80 years old, having a very shit life, a very shit family, and living in a shitty society. Get used to it, this will be a common theme of this anime. And so, after discovering that he has stomach cancer and just a bit more information about how shit his life is, he and some young guy gets killed by aliens that promptly go, well, that was unexpected, restore them as Terminators, and then promptly fuck off. We will never see or hear about them ever again. So after this, the old guy decides to be a hero, while the young dude decides to be the emo psychopath, the idol for various retards who fail at school shootings, and also there is Donald Trump in the last episode. The end. Though I may sound like I'm bashing this anime, I honestly enjoyed it for what it was. Yes, it's ridiculous, yes, the author's view of humanity is perhaps too bleak, yes, eventually it goes over the top and sometimes it can get overboard with various references, but you see, one can view it in 2 different ways. The story of good versus evil, and the story of what a person would do if he would have gotten powers of a demigod. Both are equally old, some might even say boring or overused, I personally call them tried and tested. And in both ways, it's actually not a bad story, at least for me, but I can get why people might not like it. Some people might view the scenes as too abrupt, some might not like the constant crying and trying to pry some sort of emotion out of the viewer, some wouldn't like that there's really not a lot of action. There are also problems in the graphics department. The anime is made in this blend of 3D and drawings, which can be a rather severe hit and miss, with some scenes being genuinely good, while others are shot so bad it reminded me me of Berserk. The music is also kinda meh, but this was to be expected from this genre of mature or psychological anime. If you don't believe me, please pause the recording and try to remember any track from, let's say, Paranoia Agent or something else except the opening and possibly ending. So to summarize, if you liked guns or just want to see something solid in its writing, then this anime might be something you enjoy. If not, however, or you expect something substantial from this, then I suggest you skip it. Maybe there's some bigger revelation I'm missing here. There are many ways to analyze something after all, but in the end of the day, that's what you people have to decide, not me. Asking me to decide something for you is like asking your vibrator to fill in your tax papers. Every time when a person on the internet, especially if he is of British origin or preferences in entertainment, wants to make a joke about repetitiveness that comes as pretty absurd, they always use some Monty Python sketch. Thankfully, the buggers made a shit ton of those, with nothing but hammering the same joke over and over again, and this, along with the aforementioned sketches, is what I am reminded of when I hear about these sorts of anime. Another season, another meme anime that will make all the weebs in the audience mutter some variation of anime is trash and so am I, like a very postmodernist version of Paternoster. Another 2 weeks of my employers that are into anime like Latvian fishermen are into Sharia banking, screaming their lungs about kawaii and cute anime girls with the sincerity of a PETA member speaking about saving animals. Another. Sometimes I wonder if there really is a point in animating these shows in general. Could the same effect be achieved by just making an anime opening and showing it for 24 minutes? But I digress. Plant S, or how most Western viewers will know it, that anime that PewDiePie used in his You Laugh You Lose challenge, is a slice-of-life comedy anime made out of a yonkoma, which explains why a lot of stuff in the anime flows as if several episodes are stuck into one. It tells us about a girl named Maika, who has a naturally spiteful look in her eyes, and character so pure I wouldn't be surprised if she actually shits butterflies and pisses rainbows, working in a very peculiar maid cafe where waitresses are expected to act some anime trait. Well, and that's about it, really. She and other staff members are doing stuff, and some of that stuff is supposed to be funny. I am also apparently supposed to be a reviewer, even when the point of these recordings are blatantly in their title. Some things are really hard to understand, what can you do? The graphics of this anime are pretty average, stereotypical cute girls combined with chibi style with a lot of recurring shots and gags, and the music is pretty okay for a slice of life anime, perfectly acting as a filler it is. If there's anything bad I can say about it, it's that the show relies heavily on a certain checklist of humor. Dino, the manager, tries to court Maika, who's oblivious to his feelings to the point of active malice. Mafuyu acts like a bitch towards everyone. These two like each other but are too stupid or shy to act upon it, etc. Like a lot of modern comedy anime, this sort of style, while can get a few laughs out of you, isn't really fit for binge watching, so one has to be careful not to overdose on cuteness and stupid humor. So however you might have expected this to differ from the modern slice of life routine of meaningless romance and empty spectacle, you were wrong, you idiot. But somehow this one was even more disappointing to me. Bland Scientology reminded me of those European and Turkish melodramas, and not in a good way. A bunch of obviously rich and privileged people are suffering because of love. Sad emoji. As a woman, I can understand why this stuff is enjoyable to watch, but as a man of somewhat normal levels of testosterone, this shit is boring and obviously not for my demographic. But not like it matters much. Most people who watch anime can't really be considered real men to begin with.
Strange thing is Chinese influence. Just 8 years ago, only the most devout anime fans knew that a lot of drawing and animation is routinely outsourced to China, and now the bigger world experiences a lot of actual Chinese animation, for better or worse. I personally have nothing against it. After all, all's fair in love, war, and capitalism. But as of late, Chinese studios have become infamously known for their poor production values or strange choices in storytelling. Well, at least they're better than Indian animation. Evil or Live is an anime ad in Japan created by a Chinese studio called the Shaolinger's Animation League, which people might know as creators of Blood Divorce and that recent anime about centaurs based on some either Korean or Chinese webcomic of the same name. Well, that is annoyingly confusing, but if I were a betting mask, I would say that this is probably a Korean webcomic. It certainly looks like one. South Korean entertainment industry can only do 3 things right: romance, horror, and proving that helping them in the Korean War was a mistake. Anyway, so as we begin our story with a real-life video that looks like it came straight out of some documentary about why games turn teenagers into Satanists, crying out in the 21st century, teenagers stop respecting parents, stop being productive members of society, and are turning into fucking wimps. And you know why? You think it's the ever-increasing rate of unemployment all over the world. Maybe it's the wave of existential depression they suffer because they break under the sheer weight of the oppressive post-industrial dystopia we live in. Maybe it's because most parents treat their children not as actual human beings, but as living investments, and then they cry as they strike them for bad grades or doing something they don't like. Nah, it's the internet. The internet addiction is the source of all problems parents have with their children. And so, we'll make a school that will cure internet addiction, and the school will be essentially a military training camp where poor nerds will have to live and become the perfect reasonable adult. A lying manipulative son of a bitch that strikes only in groups and cares only for himself. Yes, truly this is not only the future we chose, but the future we deserve. Okay, sarcasm aside, this is another anime about a bumbling retard going into a prison and turning into a weapon, who you would never want to be near because you fear for your life. The industrial standard of teenage-oriented anime, but is it any good? No, not really. As you probably can tell, the premise of the anime is not only absurd and breaks all sorts of international laws, but also was done before so many times, and that it just automatically becomes irritating the moment you start to watch it. None of the characters are likable, even those who do have their backstories explained. In fact, for a long time this was all just reminding me of the Soviet prison dramas I used to watch back when I was in Angola. The graphics, while not berserk quality, is certainly low budget, as characters move like they're cardboard cutouts, and some scenes are clearly being drawn by different artists. The music is meh, but the only really notable thing about it is that for some reason they decided to roll the international in Russian during the last minutes of the anime. But the biggest problem the show suffers from is its length, which is a common problem of everything original or animated from a webcomic. If this was a 1 or 2 episode OVA instead of a 12 episode series, this would not only be better, but could actually be of some merit. Because as it stands, this is just another run-of-the-mill anime with a terrible ending about angst in an unfair world, because God knows we haven't had enough of those yet. And you know what's the saddest part? I wanted to make a joke about suicide right now, but thanks to some bastards I can't. Pray to Satan so that he could bestow a gift of anorchia to those fucks. Their existence makes it really hard to make quality black humor without blatantly breaking terms of service.
If my almost 1.5 years of doing this had taught me anything, it's that 1. Reddit hates me, and 2. People don't like when I'm being overly vague, so let me quickly get the praise of Girls' Last Tour out of the way first. This is probably one of the best animated works of 2017 I had watched. Brilliantly written, masterfully atmospheric, and resoundingly imaginative, even if a lot of aspects of it was already used by nearly all anime and movies about war and post-apocalypse out there. And even considering all the horrible things I'm about to say, it's probably still one of the best animes of the year. Right, is that over with? Let's ramble. Girls' Last Tour is an anime based on a somewhat successful first commercial work of Tsukumitsu about 2 moe blobs surviving in a multi-storied city of the far, far future where humanity was having so much war that they either got relocated or died. For some reason, instead of moving away from the city as far as possible, our heroes decide that the only logical solution to their problems of everything is to move to the top of the city in hopes of finding other people and food, ignoring that in case of a nuclear or EMP bombing, the top is the thing that'll die first. On their way they do cute stuff, meet some people, and all the other slice of life shenanigans we love, hate, and masturbate to, and it all ends in them meeting mushroom people that then say stuff we all kinda guessed by now and then fuck off like a low-quality angel reference they are. The end. The graphics, for the most part, are pretty decent, with the blobs being very cute and very blob, and everything being dead, deserted, or crumbling just the way it should, but this is one of many reasons why people may not like the show or dismiss it. The moe aspect of it, the big round facial features, the constant and and eh. People who don't like this sort of stuff will find the show really irritating really fast. The music is some of the best music of this season, on par with Made in Abyss, although compared to it, there is little to no action-oriented soundtracks. Most of them are very calm and somewhat melancholic when combined with the visuals, a perfect background music to listen to while you're playing games or doing house chores, but not the type of music you want to keep on your phone or listening during an action sequence. And the pacing is the final thing that will make or break the anime for you. It's ridiculously slow. It's filled with pauses that in context do look natural, but for a person who's into more action-oriented shonens, this will all look awkward and dull. It's filled with recurring dialogues and character interactions, a thing that even the show makes fun of once, and once again, for people of action, this will be seen as pointless and unnecessary padding. Nothing substantial happens. There are no villains to fight, no greater goal, no twists. Everything happens exactly as one could expect it to happen, and we all know how the show will end. It's called Girls' Last Tour, for fuck's sake. You don't expect that they're just gonna can miraculously live happily ever after now, do you? All in all, though, on technical level, this anime was definitely done by talented people. Its theme, style, and presentation make this a very peculiar product that will probably get past a lot of you. I personally liked it immensely, but then again, I'm a sucker for these types of stories because 50% of my soul is filled with spite and the other 50% with a strong desire to kill myself, and I always come mentally prepared for anime not living up to claims that it would descend from heaven in a silvery chariot and lead us to the promised land. Which is not to say that it's bad, but it's like haggis. Tasty, but looks like something shed out a very peculiarly shaped turd.